vast expanse of the ancient world, where gods and mortals intertwine, there are stories that have echoed through the ages, their whispers carried by the winds across distant lands. One such story is that of the Golden Fleece, a tale of adventure, courage, and fate. A journey that begins with a simple yet powerful quest. This is a story of Jason, a hero chosen by destiny who sets sail on a voyage unlike any other. Guided by prophecies and divine will, he will brave dangers beyond imagination, cross treacherous seas, and face creatures of legend. With him, he carries not only the weight of his own fate, but the hopes of a kingdom that has long awaited its rightful king. As the Argo, his ship, cuts through the calm waters, a new chapter unfolds. It is a tale filled with heroes, magic, and the quiet moments of reflection that bind them all together. From the shores of Iolcus to the mysterious land of Colchis, the Golden Fleece awaits, guarded by a dragon and by the will of gods who shape the course of men. As you listen to this tale, may it guide you into rest, with each soft turn of fate easing you further into the quiet of the night. Remember to like, subscribe, and let us know where you are listening from as we journey together into the heart of ancient myth. In the distant land of Thessaly, nestled among the rolling hills and sprawling forests, there lay the kingdom of Iolcus. This was a land where the gods themselves often gazed down from the heavens, their will shaping the course of mortal lives. The kingdom was ruled by a man named Pelias, a king whose reign was marked not by peace, but by fear and uncertainty. Pelias had once been a man of humble birth, but through treachery he had taken the throne from his half-brother Aeson. The two brothers were born of the same father, but their mother had been different, and in the ways of ancient Greece, that made all the difference. Aeson, rightful heir to the throne, had been exiled by Pelias, and though he was still alive, he lived in seclusion, far from his homeland. The kingdom, though prosperous, was one built on shadows. Pelias's rule was one of constant unease, for the gods had foreseen a prophecy that Pelias would one day meet his end at the hands of a man wearing only one sandal. The words of this prophecy haunted him, and he feared the day it would come to pass. But for now, he remained in power, his grip on Iolcus unchallenged. Little did Pelias know, the time of reckoning was drawing near. A son had been born, the child of Aeson, a boy named Jason. The prophecy, though a mystery to most, would soon unfold with a quiet certainty that would forever change the course of their world. Jason's fate had already been set into motion, though he was but an infant, wrapped in the arms of destiny. As the years passed, Jason grew, though not in the comfort of his homeland. His mother, Alcimede, kept him safe, far from the palace where his uncle's eyes watched over everything. She took him to the wise centaur, Chiron, who dwelled deep within the mountains, away from the prying eyes of Pelias. It was with Chiron that Jason would be raised, learning not only the ways of the world, but also the ways of the gods. Under the centaur's gentle guidance, Jason grew strong and wise, his destiny forming before him like the stars that shone in the night sky. And so, in the kingdom of Iolcus, with its secrets and prophecies, the story of Jason began, though he knew not yet of the trials he would soon face. His path would lead him from the safety of the mountains to the heart of the kingdom, where his true calling awaited. In the quiet solitude of the mountains, the young Jason grew up, far from the looming threat of his uncle Peleus. His mother, Alcimede, had sought the protection of the wise centaur Chiron, hoping that Jason would be spared from the dangers that awaited him in Iolcus. Under Chiron's watchful eye, Jason's childhood unfolded in the peaceful embrace of nature, away from the tumult of the royal court. Chiron, the great teacher of heroes, was known for his wisdom and gentleness. He had raised many famous figures in Greek mythology, from Achilles to Asclepius. With his guidance, Jason learned the arts of war, philosophy, and healing. He studied the ways of the gods, understanding their influence on mortal lives, and learning the balance between fate and free will. As Jason grew older, he became strong and brave, the marks of a true hero. His mind was sharp and his heart was kind, qualities that would serve him well in the trials that lay ahead. But despite the serenity of his life with Chiron, Jason could not escape the prophecy that had been whispered over him since his birth, that one day he would be the one to take the throne of Iolcus, and that his arrival would bring about the downfall of King Peleus. In time, the shadow of this prophecy would catch up to Jason, and the day would come when he would have to leave the safety of the mountains and face the world. For now, though, he was still unaware of the fate that awaited him, living his days in peace, surrounded by nature's beauty and Chiron's wisdom. But the seeds of destiny had been sown, and the winds of change began to stir in the distant lands of Iolcus. One day, when Jason had come of age, Chiron gently told him the story of his birth and his true lineage. Jason learned that he was the son of Aeson, the rightful king of Iolcus, and that his uncle Peleus had usurped the throne. His heart stirred with a sense of purpose, though he still felt no desire to claim a crown for himself. Instead, Jason's thoughts turned to his people, to the kingdom of Iolcus, and to the injustice that had been done to his father. He knew that one day he would have to return and confront Peleus, but for now he was content to live in peace. But as fate would have it, Jason's moment would soon arrive. One fateful day, the call of destiny reached Jason, as if carried on the wind. It was time for him to leave the mountains and take his place in the world. His journey, though uncertain, had already begun. It was then that Jason received a summons from the city of Iolcus. His uncle, King Peleus, had learned of his survival, and the time had come for their paths to cross. Peleus, ever fearful of the prophecy that foretold his downfall, was determined to rid himself of Jason once and for all. He feared the return of his nephew, knowing that the day would come when the prophecy would come true. In the days that followed, Jason made his preparations for the long journey back to Iolcus. He left behind the peaceful refuge of the mountains with Chiron's blessing and set off towards the kingdom that had once been his father's. He did not yet know the challenges that awaited him, nor the heroes he would meet along the way, but he carried with him the strength of his training and the knowledge that his fate was tied to the fate of his kingdom. As he travelled through the hills and forests, Jason's heart was filled with a quiet resolve. He was not the same young boy who had once lived in the safety of Chiron's care. He was a man now, and his destiny was calling him to action. The gods had marked him for greatness, and though he did not seek power for its own sake, he knew that he could not ignore the path laid before him. And so, with each step, Jason moved closer to Iolcus. The journey was long and full of uncertainty, but there was no turning back. The prophecy that had haunted his family for so long would soon come to fruition. He could not escape the fate that had been written for him, but as he walked, Jason was not afraid. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that the gods, and perhaps even fate itself, had prepared him for this moment. Jason's journey, though long, brought him at last to the gates of Iolcus. The air around the city was thick with anticipation. The streets that had once been so familiar to him were now foreign, filled with the noise of a bustling kingdom. Yet there was a sombre undertone to it all, a quiet weight of uncertainty that seemed to hang in the air. Jason stood at the edge of the city, looking toward the palace where his uncle, King Peleus, awaited him. His heart beat steadily in his chest, calm but resolute. He had been raised for this moment, though he did not know it at the time. The teachings of Chiron, the quiet wisdom of his father's blood, all converged here. This was his moment, his destiny. Though it had been prophesied, Jason did not feel as though he were walking into a trap. He had been preparing for this moment all his life. The journey had been one of self-discovery, of coming to terms with who he was and who he was meant to be. But the world of Iolcus, with its grand palaces and political machinations, was a far cry from the mountains of Chiron's home. He had walked many miles, crossed rivers and forests, but now, with the gates of the city before him, he understood the weight of the challenge that lay ahead. King Peleus had not forgotten the prophecy that haunted his rule. It was said that he would fall at the hands of a man wearing only one sandal. And now, as Jason stood at the gates of Iolcus, his arrival would make the prophecy begin to stir. For, as fate would have it, Jason was indeed wearing only one sandal. It was a small accident on his journey, a misstep that had left him with a broken sandal. But now it felt like fate itself had conspired to set the stage for what was to come. Jason's path was clear. He had not come to seek revenge, nor had he come for power. He had come to reclaim what was rightfully his, to return the throne to his father's bloodline and restore justice to Iolcus. But in doing so, he would face challenges that would test him in ways he had never imagined. As Jason entered the city, the people gathered around, whispering in hushed voices, sensing the arrival of the one who would change their world. Jason walked with a calm determination, unaware of the tension that simmered in the streets. His thoughts were on the task at hand, meeting his uncle, King Peleus, and learning the fate that awaited him. The palace was not far from the gates, its stone walls rising high above the city, a symbol of Peleus's power. As Jason approached, he could not help but feel a quiet sadness for the kingdom he was about to enter. The people of Iolcus had suffered under Peleus's rule, and Jason knew that his arrival was the first step toward changing that. But he could not know what Peleus had planned for him. When Jason entered the throne room, he was met by the cold gaze of his uncle. Peleus sat upon his throne, a crown of gold resting upon his brow, but his eyes betrayed his unease. The prophecy had never been far from his mind, and Jason's arrival confirmed his deepest fear. But he greeted Jason with a polite smile, though the tension between them was palpable. "Ah, Jason," Peleus said, his voice smooth but with an edge of uncertainty. "I see you have returned." Jason nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I have come to reclaim what is rightfully mine, my uncle. I am the rightful heir to the throne of Iolcus." Peleus's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Instead, he motioned for Jason to approach. "Very well," he said, his tone darkening. "If you truly seek to claim the throne, you must prove your worth. There is a task I have for you, one that will test you in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Jason stood tall, unwavering in the face of his uncle's words. He knew that the task ahead would be difficult, but he did not hesitate. "Tell me what it is, and I will do it." Peleus smiled darkly, a glimmer of cunning in his eyes. "You must retrieve the golden fleece. It is held in the distant land of Colchis, guarded by a fearsome dragon. If you can bring me the fleece, then you will have earned your place on the throne. The golden fleece, an object of legend said to possess unimaginable power. To most, the task would have seemed impossible, a near-suicide mission that no one could survive. But for Jason, it was not just an opportunity to prove himself. It was a call to adventure, a challenge that would shape his destiny. Jason's mind raced with thoughts of the journey ahead. He had heard of the fleece, of course, but to set out on such a dangerous quest was something he had not anticipated. The road would be long and fraught with peril, but he knew that there was no turning back. His duty to his father, to his people, and to himself would carry him forward. "I will bring you the golden fleece," Jason declared, his voice steady, though his heart beat faster with the weight of the challenge ahead. Peleus seemed pleased, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Perhaps he had underestimated the resolve of his nephew. "Very well," he said, his voice still cold. "I will grant you a ship, but you must assemble a crew. Only then will you be able to complete this task." Jason left the throne room, the weight of his uncle's words still hanging over him. But he was not daunted. Instead, he felt the stirrings of excitement. This was the beginning of his journey, the first step toward reclaiming his birthright. He would not fail. The golden fleece would be his. Jason's task was set before him: to retrieve the golden fleece, a quest that would demand the strength of the gods themselves. With his uncle's challenge weighing heavily on his shoulders, Jason set out to gather a crew worthy of the journey ahead. This was not a journey for a single man. It would require the strength, courage, and wisdom of many. Jason traveled across the lands, seeking those who would sail with him on this perilous voyage. Word spread quickly as the name of the Golden Fleece was known far and wide. Heroes from every corner of Greece answered the call, eager for the adventure, for the glory, and for the promise of the fleece itself. The first step in this grand undertaking was the construction of the ship that would carry Jason and his crew. This was no ordinary ship, but a vessel that would become legendary in its own right, the Argo. With its timbers hewn from the finest trees in the land, the ship took form under the hands of skilled craftsmen. It was a vessel designed for speed and strength, capable of withstanding the storms and monsters that would surely rise against it. The gods themselves took an interest in the building of the Argo. It was said that Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, blessed the ship. Her divine guidance ensured that the Argo would be no ordinary craft. It would be a ship worthy of heroes. At the moment of its completion, a voice from the heavens rang out, declaring that the Argo was ready for its journey. Jason stood before the ship, his heart filled with pride and awe. The Argo, named after its builder, Argus, was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon for all those who would join the quest. And now, with the ship ready, Jason could begin the task of gathering his crew. The Argonauts, so named for the ship, were the finest heroes of their time. They were men and women of great strength, skill, and valor. Some were warriors, others were poets, and some were blessed with divine gifts. Together, they would form a fellowship unlike any other in Greek mythology. Among the first to join Jason were the great Heracles, whose strength was unparalleled. Orpheus, the musician whose songs could charm even the wildest beasts. And Atalanta, a skilled huntress who had no equal in the art of archery. Each hero brought their unique talents to the table, knowing that only together could they hope to succeed in the perilous quest that awaited them. As Jason traveled from city to city, recruiting his crew, the tales of the Golden Fleece grew, and so did the number of those who sought to join him. The Argo was soon filled with heroes of every kind, each one eager to prove their worth in the eyes of the gods and their fellow mortals. But it was not just strength that would win the day. The journey ahead would require more than muscle. It would require wisdom, courage, and the ability to work together in the face of unimaginable danger. Jason knew this better than anyone. Though he was a skilled leader, he understood that no hero could succeed alone. It was only through unity that the Argonauts would achieve their goal. Once the Argo was fully manned, the time came to set sail. The city of Iolcus, where Jason had been raised, would be the last sight they would see for many months. The heroes stood together on the deck, their hearts filled with both excitement and apprehension. The wind stirred the sails, and the sea seemed to beckon them forward toward the unknown. With the gods watching over them, the Argonauts set sail, leaving behind the safety of the known world and venturing into the realms of myth. They sailed into a world where monsters lurked beneath the waves, and gods and goddesses watched their every move. But for the Argonauts, there was no turning back. Their journey had begun, and it would lead them into the heart of adventure itself. The sea was calm as they sailed, but Jason knew that the peace would not last. Ahead of them lay the distant shores of Colchis, where the golden fleece was guarded by a terrible dragon. Jason and his crew would face trials unlike any they had ever imagined, and the true nature of their quest would unfold before them in ways they could not yet fathom. But for now, as the Argo cut through the waves, the Argonauts sailed forward, united in purpose and determined to succeed. The quest for the Golden Fleece was not just a journey for treasure. It was a journey that would define the very essence of their heroism. As the Argo sailed steadily across the calm seas, Jason's thoughts turned to the men and women who now sailed with him. Each one was a hero in their own right, a champion with their own skills, stories, and desires. Together, they were a force unlike any other. But it was more than just their individual strengths that made them powerful. It was their unity, the way they had come together with a shared goal and a shared sense of purpose. Among the first to join Jason on his quest was Heracles, a man whose immense strength had already earned him a legendary place in the hearts of the people. His great deeds were known throughout Greece. He had battled the Nemean lion, captured the Ceryneian hind, and completed the 12 labors set before him by King Eurystheus. His power was unmatched, and yet he sailed not for fame or glory, but for a sense of duty. He had joined the quest not out of self-interest, but out of loyalty to Jason and to the quest for justice that the Golden Fleece symbolized. Alongside him stood Orpheus, the musician whose songs had the power to charm both man and beast. Orpheus's music was not simply a source of entertainment. It was a force that could calm storms and tame wild creatures. His presence aboard the Argo brought a calmness, a sense of peace to the crew during the long and often perilous journey. His lyre, strummed in the quiet moments of the night, became a source of comfort. a reminder of the beauty and power of the world they sought to save. Then there was Atalanta, the huntress. She was known for her unrivaled skill with the bow, and her speed and precision made her a formidable ally. Atalanta's inclusion on the journey was not simply out of duty, but because of her love for adventure. She had long ago chosen the life of a warrior over the confines of the home, and her fierce independence and strength were essential to the success of their mission. Though she was a woman in a world often dominated by men, she had proven herself time and again, and her presence on the Argo was a testament to the power of determination and skill. Among the other Argonauts were men like Castor and Pollux, the twin brothers who were as inseparable as they were skilled in battle. Their bravery was legendary, and their bond was so strong that even the gods took notice. Each of them possessed remarkable abilities, whether in the art of combat or the ability to navigate the stars. They would guide the ship through treacherous waters, using their knowledge of the skies and the sea to keep the Argonauts on course. There was also Atalanta's companion, Meleager, a great warrior in his own right, whose prowess in the hunt made him a valuable member of the crew. His strength and courage were undeniable, and his deep bond with Atalanta only further solidified their roles in the quest. As the Argo made its way through the open seas, the crew would encounter other legendary heroes, such as the seer Idmon, whose prophetic abilities could guide them through the trials ahead, and the skilled shipwright Argus, whose craftsmanship ensured the Argo's durability and strength. Each hero aboard the Argo brought something unique to the table, and Jason knew that it was this diversity, this blend of skills and abilities, that would allow them to succeed. The road ahead would not be easy, and the dangers they faced would be unlike anything they had ever imagined. But together, they were more than just a crew. They were a family, bound together by a common cause, each one willing to risk everything for the sake of the others. The Argonauts were not merely a collection of individuals. They were a symbol of unity, a testament to the power of collective strength in the face of adversity. Though they came from different backgrounds, with different talents and stories, they had all come together for one purpose: to retrieve the Golden Fleece. As the days passed and the winds continued to blow, the Argo carried its heroes further from the shores of Iolcus and deeper into the unknown. The waters grew more unpredictable, and the challenges ahead seemed insurmountable. Yet, despite the uncertainty, there was a quiet confidence among the crew. They had embarked on this journey as individuals, but now they were bound together by something much greater than themselves, a shared belief in their mission and a shared resolve to see it through to the end. The sea was vast, and the road ahead was filled with challenges, but Jason and his crew were ready. The Argonauts had assembled, and together they would face whatever the gods, the monsters, and the world itself threw in their path. They were united not just by their quest for the Golden Fleece, but by their courage, their loyalty, and their belief in one another. The Argo sailed on, its sails billowing in the wind as the journey continued across the deep, vast sea. The days blurred together, with nothing but the rhythm of the waves and the endless horizon in sight. Yet, even on such a long journey, fate had ways of guiding the Argonauts to unexpected places, and one such place would offer them a brief respite, a mysterious island known as Lemnos. Lemnos was a quiet island, hidden from the world by thick forests and rugged cliffs. It was a place known to few, and yet its inhabitants were as ancient as the legends themselves. The island, though peaceful in appearance, carried a strange air. An unspoken tension lingered in the air, as if something was not quite right. It was a land of beauty, yet there was an unsettling silence that hung over it, a silence broken only by the occasional cry of the seabirds that circled above. The Argonauts, weary from their long journey, were grateful to find the island. The sea had been turbulent, and the winds had not been kind. They needed a break, a place to rest, gather their strength, and prepare for the trials ahead. It was in this moment of weariness that the island of Lemnos came into view. The crew landed upon the shores with relief, stepping onto the soft sands, their feet sinking into the earth. The warmth of the island greeted them, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. The Argonauts stretched their limbs, their bodies grateful for the solid ground beneath them after so many days on the rolling waves. However, as they made their way inland, they were met with an unexpected sight. The island, though seemingly peaceful, was inhabited by a group of women who had been cursed by the gods. These women were the daughters of Lemnos, and they had lived in isolation for many years, far removed from the rest of the world. The island's silence was not born of peace, but of loss. The women of Lemnos had once been loved by the men of their land, but they had been forsaken by their husbands in favor of foreign women. In their anger and grief, the women had turned against the men, and a great tragedy had unfolded. The men had been killed in their sleep, leaving the women as the sole inhabitants of the island. Now, the women of Lemnos lived alone, their hearts filled with sorrow and bitterness. The curse that had been placed upon them had left them without hope, without purpose, and they had become reclusive. Their once vibrant society now faded into a haunting silence. They had no desire to welcome strangers. And yet, when the Argonauts arrived, they could not help but take notice. At first, the women watched the men with suspicion, their eyes cold and distant. Yet, there was something in the Argonauts that drew them in. A kind of quiet strength, a determination to continue despite the odds. It was a strength that resonated with the women, for they too had known loss and grief. In time, the ice began to thaw, and the Argonauts were welcomed with cautious warmth. Queen Hypsipyle, the ruler of Lemnos, was the first to speak with Jason. She was a woman of great beauty, but her eyes held a sadness that no one could ignore. Her kingdom had been shattered by betrayal, and she had borne the weight of the curse placed upon her people. Yet, despite the tragedy that had befallen Lemnos, she was kind and noble, offering the Argonauts food, shelter, and supplies for their journey. Jason, ever the diplomat, spoke kindly to her, recognizing the pain in her eyes. He offered no judgment, for he knew that grief had shaped this island, just as it had shaped so many others. The Argonauts were not here to bring more sorrow, but to rest and replenish before continuing on their quest. As the days passed, the Argonauts stayed on Lemnos, and during that time they forged bonds with the women of the island. The women taught them the ways of their land, how to hunt in the dense forests, how to navigate the quiet waters around the island, and how to survive in the wild. In turn, the Argonauts shared their knowledge of the world beyond, of the lands they had seen, and the heroes they had met. Though the Argonauts had come for rest, they could not help but be moved by the plight of the women of Lemnos. Jason, in particular, felt a deep sense of sympathy for them, for he understood the pain of betrayal and the weight of a destiny shaped by others. He offered his assistance to Queen Hypsipyle, promising that one day the island of Lemnos would find peace once more. In the quiet nights, the Argonauts and the women sat around campfires, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. The songs of Orpheus filled the air, his music soothing the hearts of those who listened. For the first time in many years, the women of Lemnos allowed themselves to feel hope, a flicker of light in the darkness of their grief. Yet, as with all things in myth, the peace would not last forever. The Argonauts' journey was not one of idle rest. It was a journey toward the Golden Fleece, and the path to that treasure was fraught with dangers. After several days on Lemnos, the Argonauts knew it was time to move on. The women of the island, though they had offered their hospitality, understood this. It was time for Jason and his crew to continue their quest. Before leaving, Jason promised to return one day to bring justice to the island of Lemnos and to honor the women who had welcomed them. The Argonauts bade farewell to Queen Hypsipyle and her people, knowing that their journey would take them far from this peaceful island and into the heart of their destiny. The Argo sailed away from Lemnos, the island fading behind them, but the memories of their time there remained. It had been a brief respite, but it had been a reminder that even in the darkest of times there could still be light, if only for a moment. After leaving the island of Lemnos behind, the Argo continued its voyage, the vast expanse of the sea stretching endlessly before them. The crew, rejuvenated by the hospitality of the Lemnian women, felt the weight of their quest once more. They had rested, but the road ahead was still fraught with danger. They were no closer to the Golden Fleece, and the challenges that awaited them seemed to grow with each passing day. The sky above was clear, and the sea was calm, giving the crew a brief moment of respite as they sailed. The Argonauts were hopeful, but Jason knew better than to expect easy sailing. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that the Fleece lay still far away, guarded by a fearsome dragon, and that their journey would not be without its trials. It was then, in the quiet of the open sea, that the Argonauts sighted land again. The island that lay before them was lush and green, its shores dotted with dense forests and rolling hills. As the ship approached, they could see the silhouette of a settlement, its buildings rising above the trees. The island of the Doliones, Jason learned, was a place known for its friendly people, though it was not without its dangers. The Argonauts docked their ship at the island's port and disembarked. They were greeted warmly by the Doliones, who welcomed them with food and drink. The inhabitants were kind and hospitable, eager to hear the tales of the heroes who had sailed so far from their homeland. For a moment, the Argonauts felt as though they had stumbled upon a place of peace, far from the turmoil and danger that awaited them elsewhere. The island seemed to be a quiet sanctuary, untouched by the conflict and strife that so often accompanied heroes. It was a place where they could rest, recover, and perhaps even prepare for the trials ahead. But peace, as the Argonauts would soon learn, was fleeting. As night fell and the stars filled the sky above, a great misunderstanding occurred. The Doliones, unaware of the true nature of the Argonauts' mission, mistook the crew for invaders, enemies who had come to threaten their way of life. Fear gripped the islanders, and a wave of confusion spread through the settlement. In the dark of the night, a tragic battle unfolded, a clash between the Argonauts and the very people who had welcomed them. The Argonauts, though brave and skilled, did not wish for conflict. They had come in peace, seeking only a brief respite on their long journey. But in the confusion of the night, battle was inevitable. The sounds of clashing swords and the cries of warriors filled the air as the two sides, mistaking each other's intentions, fought desperately. Jason, hearing the commotion, rushed to the scene. He called out to his men, ordering them to cease the fighting, but the confusion had already spread too far. It was only after much bloodshed, when the first light of dawn began to break, that the truth became clear. The Doliones had realized their mistake, but the damage had already been done. With heavy hearts, the Argonauts and the Doliones surveyed the aftermath of the battle. The air was thick with the weight of what had happened. There had been no true enemy here, only a misunderstanding that had led to unnecessary death. The Argonauts, though victorious, were filled with sorrow. They had not come to fight, but to rest, and yet they had found themselves in the midst of conflict. Jason spoke solemnly to the Doliones, offering his apologies and extending his hand in friendship. He knew that the path ahead was one of great difficulty, but he also understood the importance of peace, of finding common ground where there seemed to be none. Though the Doliones had made a grave mistake, they had not done so out of malice. It was simply the chaos of fear, the misunderstanding of strangers who had appeared in the night. The Doliones, now aware of their error, expressed their regret and offered a formal apology. Jason and his crew accepted the apology, though it did little to ease the grief they felt over the lives lost. The Argonauts knew that the journey ahead would require them to face far greater challenges, but they could not help but carry the weight of this tragic encounter with them. The Argonauts spent the remainder of their time on the island in quiet reflection. They helped the Doliones rebuild what had been lost, offering their strength to repair homes and heal wounds. But the shadow of the battle hung over them, a reminder that even in the pursuit of a noble cause, misunderstandings could lead to dire consequences. When the time came to depart, the Argonauts did so with a sense of quiet resolve. They had learned the cost of conflict, the fragility of peace, and the importance of understanding. The Doliones, now their friends once more, wished them well on their journey. But the Argonauts knew that the road ahead was still long and filled with unknown perils. As they sailed away from the island of the Doliones, the sea seemed to stretch out before them, a vast and infinite expanse. But Jason and his crew, though they carried the sorrow of the night with them, were no longer the same. They had learned something crucial, that even the greatest of heroes must be mindful of the consequences of their actions, no matter how noble their intentions. As the Argo continued its journey through the open sea, a new challenge lay ahead. A challenge that would test not just the skill of Jason and his crew, but also their ability to trust in the will of the gods themselves. The clashing rocks, known as the Symplegades, were one of the most feared obstacles in the ancient world. These towering, jagged cliffs stood on either side of a narrow strait, and they were notorious for their violent, unpredictable movements. At the slightest disturbance, the rocks would collide, crushing anything in their path. The crew of the Argo had heard tales of these deadly rocks, of ships and sailors who had been lost to their relentless force. It was said that no ship had ever passed through the strait unscathed, for the rocks moved with a fierce power, striking with little warning. The Symplegades were a place of death, a place where only the bravest dared to tread. Yet Jason and the Argonauts had no choice. The golden fleece lay beyond the rocks, in the distant land of Colchis. There was no other way to reach their goal. They had come too far to turn back now. As the Argo neared the strait, the tension among the crew grew. The skies above had darkened, and the sea had become choppy. The air seemed thick with an unnatural energy, as though the rocks themselves were waiting, biding their time until the moment was right to strike. Jason stood at the bow of the ship, his eyes fixed on the narrowing gap between the cliffs. He could hear the crashing of the waves, feel the tension in the air. The time had come. This was the moment that would define their journey. Jason knew that the only way to pass through the Symplegades was to trust in the guidance of the gods and in the will of the ship itself. As if answering his thoughts, a sudden gust of wind swept through the sails, pushing the Argo forward with renewed speed. Jason glanced over his shoulder at Orpheus, who stood nearby with his lyre. The musician's eyes met Jason's, and with a nod, Orpheus began to play. His music, soft at first, grew louder and more intense, echoing across the waters. The sound of Orpheus's lyre filled the air, a melody that seemed to calm the turmoil in the hearts of the Argonauts. It was said that Orpheus's music had the power to charm even the most fearsome creatures, to quell storms and soothe the most savage beasts. As the Argo neared the rocks, the crew felt a sense of peace settle over them, a sense of trust in the power of Orpheus's song and the guidance of the gods. Jason gave the signal to steer the ship forward. The Argo, guided by the music and the winds, sailed toward the strait. The clashing rocks loomed ahead, their jagged edges sharp and unforgiving. Jason's heart raced in his chest, but his mind was clear. He knew that they had to move quickly, that hesitation could mean disaster. As they entered the narrow passage, the rocks began to stir. The waters grew rougher, and the cliffs seemed to shift in the distance. For a moment, the crew held their breath. The rocks were alive, moving as if they had a will of their own. With a sudden, violent crack, the cliffs began to close in, their sharp edges threatening to crush the Argo in an instant. Jason's voice rang out, steady and firm, giving the order to steer the ship to the left. The Argonauts worked together, pulling on ropes and adjusting the sails with practiced precision. The ship moved swiftly, its sleek frame gliding through the turbulent waters. But the rocks were closing in fast, their massive forms pressing together with terrifying force. Just as it seemed that the Argo would be trapped between the cliffs, a miracle happened. The rocks paused, as if waiting for something or someone. Jason, sensing the moment, called for the ship to move forward once more. With a final burst of speed, the Argo surged through the narrow gap, narrowly avoiding the crushing jaws of the Symplegades. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief as the ship sailed into open waters once more. The rocks, having clashed once more behind them, fell still. They had passed through the Symplegades, something no ship had ever done before. The Argonauts, their hearts still racing, exchanged relieved smiles, knowing that they had overcome one of the greatest obstacles on their path. Jason, though filled with gratitude and awe, did not allow himself to rest for long. They had succeeded in passing the Symplegades, but the journey was far from over. The golden fleece still lay ahead, guarded by a fierce dragon and hidden deep within the land of Colchis. Their task was far from complete, but for now, as the Argo sailed forward, the crew knew they had achieved something remarkable. They had faced the clashing rocks, and they had emerged victorious. It was a moment that would live on in legend, a testament to the courage and unity of the Argonauts. As the sea calmed and the winds shifted in their favor, Jason stood at the bow of the ship, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The Fleece and the challenges that lay ahead awaited them. But for the moment, they could savor the sweetness of victory, knowing that their courage had carried them through the most dangerous part of their journey. After the triumph of passing through the clashing rocks, the Argonauts felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead, though still fraught with peril, seemed more attainable now. The golden fleece, Their ultimate goal was within their grasp, and the challenges that had so far tested their courage and unity had only made them stronger. The Argo sailed on, its course set toward Colchis, a distant land where the Fleece was said to be guarded by both powerful magic and a fearsome dragon. As the days passed, the crew remained vigilant, knowing that they were drawing closer to the heart of their quest. The sea around them began to change. The waters grew calmer, and the sky, once so full of uncertainty, cleared into a serene expanse. Yet the peacefulness of the surroundings did little to ease the tension that had settled within the hearts of the Argonauts. They knew that their journey was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Finally, after many days of sailing, the shores of Colchis came into view. The land was unlike any the Argonauts had encountered before. The mountains rose high into the sky, their jagged peaks shrouded in mist. The coast was dotted with rocky coves and dark forests, where the whispers of ancient magic seemed to stir the very air. As they approached the port of Colchis, Jason's heart began to pound in his chest. This was it. The Golden Fleece was close, but so too was the danger. Jason had heard tales of the Fleece, of its power to bestow kingship and bring prosperity, but he had also heard of the price that would be paid to claim it. Jason stood at the bow of the Argo, his eyes fixed on the distant shore. He had come so far, and now, with Colchis before him, he knew that his destiny was finally within reach. But he could not shake the feeling that the Fleece would not be so easily obtained. The challenges would not cease simply because they had arrived. As the ship docked and the Argonauts disembarked, they were greeted by the royal court of Colchis, led by King Aetes. Aetes, a ruler known for his cunning and cruelty, looked upon the Argonauts with an air of disdain. He knew why they had come. His kingdom was rich and powerful, and the Golden Fleece was the greatest treasure he possessed. To give it up was unimaginable, and yet Jason's arrival, with the prophecy of the Fleece hanging over his head, could not be ignored. The Argonauts were led into the palace, a grand structure made of stone and adorned with symbols of the gods. The palace was dark and cold, a reflection of the land itself, beautiful but filled with an unsettling sense of danger. The walls were lined with tapestries that depicted scenes of ancient battles and gods waging wars against mortals. In the center of the hall stood the throne of King Aetes, an imposing figure who watched Jason with calculating eyes. "I know why you have come," Aetes said, his voice cold and steady. "You seek the Golden Fleece, the treasure that has been guarded by my family for generations. But you must prove your worth before you may take it." Jason stood tall, his gaze unwavering as he faced the king. "I have come to claim what is rightfully mine," he said, his voice firm. "But I will not take it by force. I will complete the tasks you set before me." Aeetes studied Jason for a moment, his expression unreadable. He then motioned to the high priestess, a woman named Medea, who stood nearby. Medea, with her dark eyes and commanding presence, was the daughter of Aeetes. And though she was beautiful, there was a hint of something more beneath her serene exterior. She was a woman of great power, her abilities in magic and sorcery well known. "Medea," Aeetes said, "you will assist Jason in the trials he must face." Medea stepped forward, her gaze meeting Jason's. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she said nothing. Her presence was commanding, and Jason felt a sense of unease as she stood beside him. He knew that her magic could either be his greatest ally or his greatest obstacle, but for now he had no choice but to trust her. King Aeetes then laid out the tasks that Jason must complete to obtain the golden fleece. The first was to yoke 2 fire-breathing bulls, monstrous creatures that were as fierce as they were dangerous. Jason would then have to plough a field with the bulls and sow it with the teeth of a dragon. From these teeth, warriors would spring forth, and Jason must defeat them in battle. The tasks were daunting, to say the least. They seemed almost impossible, but Jason was not one to back down from a challenge. His heart burned with determination. The golden fleece was within reach, and he would not let anything stand in his way. As the Argonauts gathered to prepare for the trials, Medea approached Jason in private. Her eyes were dark, and though her expression was calm, Jason sensed that there was something more beneath her cool exterior. She offered her help, knowing that her magic could make the impossible tasks possible. "I will assist you," she said softly. "But you must trust me, Jason. The path ahead is filled with dangers, and only through my help can you hope to succeed." Jason nodded, his heart conflicted. He knew that he needed her assistance if he was to complete the tasks. But there was something about Medea that troubled him. She was powerful, yes, but there was an air of mystery about her that made him wary. Still, there was no turning back now. The trials awaited him, and the golden fleece was so close. With Medea's help, Jason prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead. Jason stood before the gates of the royal palace in Colchis, the weight of the tasks ahead pressing heavily upon his shoulders. His mind raced with thoughts of the trials laid before him. The fire-breathing bulls, the sowing of the dragon's teeth, and the warriors that would rise from the earth. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was mounting. The golden fleece, which had seemed so distant when they first set sail, was now within his grasp. Yet so were the dangers that lay ahead. It was early morning, and the air was thick with anticipation. The Argonauts had gathered in the palace courtyard, where King Aeetes had instructed them to wait. Medea stood by Jason's side, her presence a silent reassurance, though Jason could not shake the unease he felt in her company. Her dark eyes gleamed with a quiet understanding, as if she knew something he did not. Her magic was powerful, but Jason was aware that magic always came with a price. "Remember, Jason," Medea whispered, as she gently placed her hand on his arm. "You must trust in yourself, but also in the gifts I offer. The bulls are fierce, but together we can tame them." Jason nodded, though his heart was still heavy with doubt. These were not ordinary bulls. They were creatures of immense strength, with hooves that could crush stone and fiery breath that could melt iron. They had been kept in the royal stables of Colchis for years, and no man had ever dared to tame them. Medea stepped forward, her voice low but filled with authority. "I will provide you with a potion, one that will allow you to control the bulls, if only for a moment. But you must act quickly, for their strength is unmatched." With that, she handed him a small vial filled with a shimmering liquid. Jason studied the vial, his thoughts racing. He had never been one to rely on magic, but the bulls were beyond even the greatest of heroes. Without hesitation, he drank the potion, feeling the warmth of the liquid as it spread through his veins. As the potion took effect, Jason felt a sudden surge of energy and clarity. His senses sharpened, and his mind focused on the task ahead. He knew that this was his moment, and he could not afford to hesitate. Medea's voice cut through his thoughts. "Now, Jason, go." With her words, Jason strode forward, his steps confident and steady. The gates to the royal arena opened before him, revealing the two massive bulls. They stood in the center of the arena, their bodies rippling with muscle, their eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. The ground beneath their hooves was scorched, and their breath billowed in great clouds of smoke. Jason felt the heat of their fire-breathing rage before he even stepped closer. The bulls stamped their hooves, the sound like thunder, and their roars shook the very earth. But Jason did not falter. The potion had given him the strength and resolve he needed. His eyes met the bulls, and for a moment all was still. The first bull charged toward him, its fiery breath roaring like an inferno. Without hesitation, Jason leapt forward, using the power granted by the potion to dodge the bull's attack. He moved with a fluidity and speed that surprised even him, his body seemingly in perfect harmony with the powerful forces around him. He grabbed the bull's reins, pulling them tight, and for a moment the creature stilled. Jason held his ground, his body trembling with the effort of controlling the beast. The bull snarled, its fiery breath licking the air, but Jason's grip was firm. Slowly, he began to steer the creature, guiding it toward the nearby yoke. The heat of the bull's breath pressed against his skin, but Jason remained focused, his heart steady. He could feel the potion's magic beginning to fade, but he pressed on. The second bull charged at him, and Jason was ready. He sidestepped the attack, his muscles straining with the effort as he reached for the second bull's reins. It fought against him, but Jason's determination was unwavering. With a final surge of strength, he yoked the second bull to the first. The two bulls, now bound together, stood still for a moment, their fiery eyes locked onto Jason's. For a brief instant the arena was silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Jason's body shook with exhaustion, but he did not let go. The bulls, though powerful and untamed, had been subdued, if only for a moment. The crowd, which had gathered to watch, erupted in cheers. Jason stood tall, his chest heaving with the effort of taming the creatures. His heart raced, but he knew that this was only the beginning. He had completed the first task, but there were more challenges to come. Jason turned to face Medea, who stood at the edge of the arena, watching with a look of approval on her face. Her magic had helped him, but it was his own strength and resolve that had seen him through. He felt a sense of pride in what he had accomplished, but he knew that there was still much to be done. With the bulls yoked, Jason turned to the next part of the task, ploughing the field. It was a simple task, but it was also a dangerous one. The field was filled with the dragon's teeth, and once the seeds were sown, the warriors would rise from the earth. Jason could only hope that he would be able to defeat them, as he had the bulls. Jason stood in the arena, the two fire-breathing bulls now yoked and subdued, the field prepared for the next trial. His heart still pounded in his chest, the fire of the bull's breath still fresh in his memory. But there was no time to rest, no time to savor the victory of the first task. The second trial awaited him, a test not of strength, but of wit and courage. King Aeetes had watched from his throne, his expression inscrutable as Jason completed the first trial. Now he watched as Jason moved to the next task, the sowing of the dragon's teeth. This was no ordinary field. This was a field where, once the seeds were planted, warriors would rise from the earth, fully armed and ready for battle. They were the warriors of the dragon, a challenge that had claimed the lives of many before Jason. The fearsome creatures Jason had already conquered were nothing compared to the warriors that would soon emerge. Medea's magic had aided him in the first trial, and she had warned him that this trial would be just as perilous. She stood by his side, her presence a quiet but powerful force. Jason turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a mix of determination and uncertainty. "I can do this," Jason said, his voice steady, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Medea nodded, though her gaze remained thoughtful. "Trust in the magic, Jason, but also in yourself. The warriors may rise, but they are not invincible." Jason took a deep breath and walked toward the field, the soil rich and dark beneath his feet. He reached into the pouch Medea had given him, pulling out the dragon's teeth, each one gleaming with a strange ancient power. These teeth were not mere bones. They were the essence of the dragon, imbued with a magic that could bring them to life. Jason knelt to the earth and began to scatter the teeth, watching as they sank into the ground, one by one. The air around him seemed to hum with energy, a sense of something ancient and powerful awakening. As the last of the teeth disappeared beneath the soil, Jason stood and stepped back. He waited. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft rustling of the wind. And then the earth trembled. It was a low rumble at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew stronger with each passing second. The soil began to shift, and cracks appeared along the ground. Jason's heart raced as the first of the warriors emerged, their bodies covered in armor, their eyes burning with the fire of life. The warriors, created from the very teeth Jason had sown, rose from the earth, each one an exact replica of the last. They were fierce, with the strength of dragons and the skill of seasoned fighters. Their weapons gleamed in the sunlight, and their battle cries filled the air as they stood ready for combat. Jason knew that his next task was to defeat them, but there were too many, and their numbers seemed to grow with each moment. The warriors charged at him, their swords raised high, their shields gleaming with deadly purpose. Jason reached for his own weapon, his sword gleaming in the sunlight. He had no choice but to fight. The first warrior approached with terrifying speed, his sword aimed straight for Jason's chest. With a swift movement, Jason sidestepped the attack and struck back, his blade clashing against the warrior's shield. The force of the blow sent the warrior staggering, but he quickly regained his footing, ready for the next attack. Jason fought with all his strength, his body moving with practiced precision as he parried and struck. The warriors were relentless, their movements calculated and swift. But Jason was faster. His mind was sharp, and his experience as a hero had prepared him for moments like this. He cut down one warrior after another, his sword dancing in the air as each blow struck its mark. But the warriors kept coming, more rising from the ground as the last fell. Jason could feel the exhaustion creeping in. His muscles burned, his breath quickened, but he could not stop. The Fleece was so close, and this trial was just another obstacle he had to overcome. He glanced around, trying to find a strategy, a way to end the battle once and for all. It was then that he remembered Medea's words. "They are not invincible." Jason's eyes narrowed as he scanned the battlefield. There was something he had missed, something that could give him the edge he needed. The warriors were powerful, but they were born of magic, and magic, Jason knew, could be undone. With renewed determination, Jason fought his way to the center of the field, where the earth seemed to crack open with even greater force. He could feel the magic of the dragon's teeth pulsing in the air. The warriors were drawn to him, their movements growing more frantic as they realized that he was the key to their creation and their destruction. Jason closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the magic that had brought the warriors to life. He felt the power of the earth beneath him, the pulse of the dragon's teeth still resonating in the ground. With all his strength, he plunged his sword into the earth, driving it deep into the soil where the teeth had been sown. The ground shook violently as a crack of light shot from the blade, and the warriors froze in place. The magic that had brought them to life was undone, and one by one the warriors collapsed, their bodies turning to dust as the earth reclaimed them. Jason stood, his sword still embedded in the ground, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The battle was over. He had succeeded in the second trial. Medea approached him, her eyes filled with pride and something else, perhaps relief. "You have done it," she said softly. "The fleece is closer now, but there are still dangers to face." Jason nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. His body ached, but the sense of accomplishment flooded through him. The warriors were gone, and the golden fleece was now within his grasp. Yet Jason knew that the final trial awaited him, the dragon that guarded the fleece. This was not a time for rest. The journey was almost over, but the greatest challenge still lay ahead. With the defeat of the warriors born from the dragon's teeth, Jason had completed the second trial, and his heart swelled with both triumph and anticipation. Yet, despite the victory, he knew the hardest part of his journey still lay ahead. The golden fleece was close, but it was not to be claimed so easily. It was guarded by a fierce dragon, one whose power and wrath were legendary. This dragon was no mere creature. It was an ancient beast, imbued with magic as old as the land itself. It had guarded the fleece for centuries, and none had dared to challenge it and lived to tell the tale. Jason, weary but resolute, stood at the edge of the grove where the fleece hung, suspended high in a great oak tree. The golden wool glimmered in the soft light of the setting sun, but there was no time to admire its beauty. The dragon lay coiled around the tree's base, its immense form nearly hidden in the shadows of the forest. Its eyes were closed, as if it slumbered, but Jason knew that this was not a moment for hope. This was the final trial, and it would require more than strength alone. Medea, who had stood by him throughout the trials, approached quietly. Her presence, though calming, carried the weight of something far more significant. Her knowledge of magic, the same magic that had guided Jason so far, could be the key to facing the dragon. But even she seemed hesitant now. "Jason." Medea spoke softly, her voice a mere whisper. "The dragon is under a spell, bound to guard the fleece for all eternity. Its wakefulness cannot be easily undone, but I can help you. My magic will ensure that it does not awaken when you take the fleece." Jason turned to her, his face grim with the knowledge of what lay ahead. "Can you put it to sleep? Forever?" Medea hesitated, her brow furrowing. "No, the dragon is bound by a curse older than even my magic. But I can make it slumber long enough for you to take the fleece. After that, it will be up to you." Jason nodded, understanding the weight of her words. It was a chance, a fleeting opportunity that might not come again. He turned his gaze back to the dragon, its massive form coiled protectively around the fleece. He could feel its power in the air, its presence like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Do it," Medea," Jason said. "Give me the chance to claim the fleece." Medea stepped forward, her eyes closing in concentration. She raised her hands, and a soft light began to radiate from her fingers, casting a faint glow over the ground. The magic she wielded was subtle but powerful, rooted in the very fabric of nature and the ancient forces that govern the world. As she spoke in a language Jason could not understand, the dragon's form began to relax. Its massive chest rose and fell more slowly, its eyes remaining shut. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Jason could feel the shift in the air, the tension lifting as the dragon's slumber deepened. But he knew it would not last forever. Time was short. "Go now," Medea urged, her voice barely a whisper. "The fleece is yours, but hurry." Jason took a deep breath and stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He approached the dragon slowly, careful not to make a sound. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he could not stop now, not when the fleece was so close. The golden wool shimmered in the light, almost beckoning him. It was the prize that would restore his family's throne, the symbol of victory that had guided him on this journey. As Jason reached the tree, the dragon shifted slightly, its massive head twitching in its sleep. But it did not wake. With a steady hand, Jason reached up and gently took hold of the fleece. It was soft to the touch, its golden strands warm and smooth. The moment his fingers closed around it, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble, but he held firm. The dragon stirred once more, but Medea's magic held it in place. Jason could feel the pulse of power within the fleece, the weight of its significance settling over him. With a final glance at the sleeping dragon, he began to retreat slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace Medea had woven. He moved back toward the Argo, the fleece now in his possession. His heart swelled with a sense of accomplishment, but there was no time to celebrate. The journey had been long, and the trials had been many. But Jason knew that the hardest part was still ahead, getting back to Iolcus, where the fleece would restore his kingdom and secure his place as its rightful king. The fleece was in his hands, but with it came the weight of the god's will. Jason understood that this was only the beginning. The return to Iolcus would be fraught with challenges, and the fleece itself would soon become the object of even greater strife. But for now, as the Argo sailed away from Colchis, Jason allowed himself a moment of quiet victory. The dragon was behind him, the fleece was his, and the Argonauts had completed what many thought was impossible. The Argo sailed smoothly away from the shores of Colchis, its sails filled with the favor of the wind. Jason stood at the bow, the golden fleece now securely in his hands. His heart was still racing from the final trial, and the sense of victory was beginning to sink in. Yet, despite the relief he felt, there was no time for rest. The journey was far from over. King Aeetes, the ruler of Colchis, had learned of Jason's success, and his wrath would soon follow. The Argonauts had no time to celebrate their triumph. As the ship sailed into open water, the crew knew that they were being pursued. Aeetes, furious at the loss of the Fleece, would not let Jason leave without a fight. He had sent his soldiers to capture the Argonauts, and they would not stop until the Fleece was returned. Jason turned to Medea, who stood nearby, her expression one of quiet resolve. Her magic had helped him defeat the dragon and claim the Fleece. But now the true test would come. Could they outrun Aeetes' wrath? Would Medea's powers be enough to protect them from the forces that pursued them? "We cannot stay ahead of them for long," Jason said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We must act quickly." Medea's eyes were dark, her mind racing as she considered their options. "Aeetes will send his best men after us, but we have something he doesn't, the element of surprise. I know my father's tactics. We can outwit him if we move swiftly and strike when he least expects it." Jason nodded. He trusted Medea, and though the thought of running from their enemies weighed on him, he knew that the Fleece was too important to risk losing now. Their only chance was to outmaneuver Aeetes and his forces. With Medea's guidance, the Argonauts began to sail in a series of erratic, unpredictable directions. They changed course every few hours, weaving through islands and treacherous waters, hoping to confuse their pursuers. The sea was vast, and while Jason and his crew had no guarantee of safety, they had the hope of evading capture. The chase was relentless. For days, the Argonauts sailed with all their might, but Aeetes' soldiers were skilled sailors. The sound of pursuit, the cry of the Colchian ships, was never far behind. The Argonauts had faced great challenges to reach Colchis, but now they faced the greatest challenge yet. Not the Fleece or the dragon, but the wrath of an entire kingdom determined to reclaim what they had lost. Medea stood beside Jason as they navigated the ship through the night. The moon shone brightly overhead, and the sea was calm, but the tension was palpable. Medea's magic was still strong, but even she knew that the Argonauts' luck could run out. She had given them a fighting chance, but they were running out of time. "I will do everything I can to delay my father," Medea whispered, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "But it is not enough to simply run. We must use every advantage we have." Jason turned to her, his face a mixture of determination and concern. "What do you suggest?" Medea hesitated before speaking. "I can cast a spell to create an illusion. It will mislead the ships of my father, causing them to follow a false trail. But it will only last for so long. We must act quickly." Jason's gaze hardened. "Then we will make it count." As Medea prepared her magic, the Argonauts worked together, readying the ship for the next phase of their journey. Orpheus played a soothing melody on his lyre to calm their nerves, while Heracles and Atalanta discussed strategies for the next battle, should one come. The unity of the crew was more important than ever as they faced the uncertainty of the chase. Medea stood at the stern of the ship, her arms raised high as she began to chant softly in an ancient tongue. The air around her shimmered with an ethereal glow, and the sea seemed to respond to her call. A mist began to form around the Argo, thick and swirling, obscuring the ship from view. The illusion was taking shape, and for a moment it seemed as if the entire world had shifted. The Argonauts were no longer visible, hidden beneath the veil of Medea's spell. "Now," Medea said, her voice low but filled with power, "we move." Jason nodded, his hands steady on the wheel as he guided the ship through the mist. The illusion would protect them, but only for a short time. They had to move faster than their pursuers, taking advantage of the spell before it wore off. For hours, the Argo sailed through the fog, the world around them hidden from view. The sound of the pursuing ships faded, and Jason allowed himself a brief moment of hope. The illusion had worked, and for the first time since leaving Colchis, the Argonauts were free from the threat of capture. But they could not rest. The illusion would not last forever. Jason knew that they would have to keep moving, keep outsmarting Aetes's forces, or risk being caught in the open sea. As they sailed further into the night, Jason and the Argonauts pressed on, determined to escape the wrath of Colchis and keep the golden fleece in their hands. The chase was far from over, but they had been given a reprieve, one that would allow them to live to fight another day. The mist had served its purpose, granting the Argonauts a brief respite from their pursuers, but the peace was fleeting. As the days passed, the illusion began to fade, and the reality of the chase set in once more. The Colchian ships, now back on their trail, were relentless. The Argonauts could no longer rely solely on the tricks of magic. They had to find a way to ensure their escape, or risk everything they had fought for. Jason stood at the bow of the Argo, gazing out across the endless horizon. The crew was tired, their spirits worn thin from the unyielding chase. The constant threat of Aetes's soldiers was a weight that pressed on them all. They had the golden fleece, but they could not outrun their fate forever. They needed a plan, something that would give them the upper hand once and for all. Medea, who had been quiet since the mist had dissipated, approached him. Her face, once filled with confidence, now wore an expression of deep concern. Jason turned to her, sensing that something had changed. "Medea," he said softly, "what's wrong?" She hesitated, her gaze distant. "The illusion is fading, and my father's ships are closing in. We can't keep running forever. We must confront him, or we will lose everything." Jason felt a pang of dread. "What do you suggest?" Medea's eyes met his, her expression grave. "I can help you, Jason, but it will come at a cost." Jason frowned, sensing the weight of her words. "What do you mean?" Medea took a deep breath before speaking. "The magic that I used to delay my father's pursuit, it will only last for so long. But I can do more. I can create a spell that will bind Ates' ships, preventing them from following us. It will give us time to escape. But there is a price. The spell will drain me of my power. It may even cost me my life. Jason was struck silent by her words. The weight of what she was offering pressed on him heavily. Medea, you can't. Medea held up a hand, stopping him before he could protest further. I've made my choice, Jason. You and the Argonauts have given me hope, a chance to do something greater than myself. I can't let my father's wrath destroy that. The fleece is yours, but you must leave Colchis and my father behind. I will do what I must to ensure that you are safe. Jason's heart ached as he looked into Medea's eyes. She had already sacrificed so much for him and the quest. Her magic, her courage, and her heart had carried them through the trials. And now she was willing to give the ultimate sacrifice, to risk her very life to secure their escape. I won't let you do this, Jason said, his voice soft but firm. Medea smiled sadly, her hand brushing his cheek in a tender gesture. It's the only way. I cannot turn back now, Jason. I've chosen this path. Jason stood in silence, torn between the desperate need to protect Medea and the harsh reality that this was the only way. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the price of heroism, the sacrifices that were demanded in the pursuit of greatness. But it was a price he wasn't ready to pay. Medea, sensing his inner turmoil, spoke again, her voice a quiet whisper. You will be king, Jason. You will return to Iolcus and reclaim your throne. And I will be remembered as the woman who helped you fulfill your destiny. We will both be remembered. With those words, Medea turned away and began to prepare the spell. Jason, though deeply troubled, knew there was no stopping her. He had learned much from her over the course of their journey, about love, about sacrifice, about magic. And now he would learn the true weight of those lessons. The crew stood at the ready as Medea gathered the necessary ingredients for the spell. She spoke softly to herself, her incantations barely audible as she mixed herbs, powders, and ancient symbols into a mixture that shimmered with power. The air around her seemed to pulse with the energy of the spell, and the crew watched with quiet respect as she prepared herself for the final act. When the time came, Medea approached Jason one last time. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. Trust me, she said softly. This will work, but you must go. The longer we stay, the more dangerous it becomes. Jason hesitated, but then nodded, his hand squeezing hers. He didn't want to let go, but he knew that this was what needed to happen. With one final glance, Jason turned and boarded the Argo, his heart heavy with the weight of what Medea was about to do. The crew, too, understood. The sacrifice she was making was immense, but it was the only way for them to escape Ates' pursuit. As the ship prepared to leave, Jason felt the magic in the air shift, a crackling energy that seemed to surge from Medea herself. The wind picked up, and the Argo set sail once more, leaving the shores of Colchis behind. But as they sailed, Jason could feel the power of the spell building, a powerful force that held the pursuing ships at bay. The Colchian fleet, once a relentless shadow, now seemed to falter, their movements slowing as if bound by some invisible force. Medea's sacrifice had worked. The Argonauts were free, but Jason's heart remained heavy with the knowledge that Medea had given everything to ensure their escape. As the Argo sailed on, Jason made a silent vow to return the favor, to honor her sacrifice when the time came. The journey home was filled with a quiet kind of tension. The Argonauts, now in possession of the Golden Fleece, had faced the harshest trials they could imagine and conquered them. With Medea's sacrifice, they had finally escaped the wrath of King Aeetes and his fleet. But the weight of what had happened in Colchis still lingered in Jason's heart. As the Argo sailed steadily toward the shores of Iolcus, Jason stood at the bow, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sea, once a vast and intimidating expanse, now seemed like a pathway back to his destiny, a destiny that awaited him at the gates of his father's kingdom. But this journey was not just about the fleece. It was about the kingdom, about reclaiming what was rightfully his, and about facing the consequences of the choices he had made. Medea, though physically drained from the immense sacrifice she had made, remained by Jason's side. Her presence was a quiet comfort, though the distance between them was growing, even if only in the spaces between their words. She had given so much to Jason, and though he was grateful beyond measure, a part of him felt the weight of her sacrifice too deeply to speak of it. The Argonauts, too, were exhausted, their bodies worn from the trials they had faced, but their spirits were high. They had succeeded in the impossible, and now the fleece was theirs. But the shores of Iolcus loomed ahead, a land of both promise and danger. Jason knew that his uncle, King Peleus, would not welcome him back with open arms. The prophecy, which had haunted the kingdom for so long, was still there, and Jason's return would mark the beginning of a new struggle for the throne. As the Argo approached the shore, the crew gathered on deck. There was no grand celebration, no cheers of victory, only a sense of quiet accomplishment and perhaps a bit of uncertainty. They had come so far, but now the hardest part was yet to come. The Golden Fleece was in their hands, but its true value would be realized only when it was presented to Peleus. "Are we ready?" Jason asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Heracles, standing beside him, placed a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder. "You have what you came for. It's time to take what's rightfully yours." Jason nodded, though his mind raced. The fleece was the key, but would it be enough to reclaim the throne? Would Peleus accept it, Or would the prophecy that had once terrified him still hold power over the kingdom? As the Argo docked and the crew disembarked, the familiar sights of Iolcus filled Jason with a bitter-sweet sense of nostalgia. This was home, but it had been a long time since it had felt like home. The palace, the streets, even the air seemed different now. There was a heaviness to the land, a shadow that had hung over it for far too long. The Argonauts made their way through the city toward the palace, the golden fleece held high by Jason. As they entered the palace gates, they were met by the watchful eyes of Pelias's guards. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jason could feel the weight of the prophecy bearing down on him. Inside the throne room, King Pelias awaited them. His face, though regal, was hard. His eyes narrowed as he watched Jason approach. The prophecy had always been a source of fear for him, and now, with Jason returning from Colchis with the golden fleece, that fear was bound to resurface. Jason, standing tall before the throne, did not hesitate. He held the fleece out for all to see. "I have returned," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and I bring what was taken from my father." Pelias's eyes flicked from the fleece to Jason, his expression unreadable. "You have succeeded," he said quietly, though there was no warmth in his tone. "But you are still my nephew. The throne is mine, and it will remain so." Jason's heart pounded, but he did not back down. He had come too far to let Pelias's words sway him. "The throne is mine by birthright, and the fleece is the proof." Pelias stood from his throne, his movements slow and deliberate. "I will not give up my crown so easily," he said, his voice cold. "You may have the fleece, but there are those who will stand by me. The kingdom is not yours to take." The tension in the room was thick, and Jason could feel the weight of his next words. This was the moment that would define his future and the future of Iolcus. He had fought for the fleece, but now he had to fight for his birthright. "I have no desire for war," Jason said, his voice steady. "But I will not allow fear to rule this kingdom any longer. You have had your time, Pelias. It is my turn to lead." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of Pelias's measured breathing. Then, slowly, the king's face softened, and he lowered his gaze. "You think you can defeat me so easily, Jason?" Jason's heart was heavy, but his resolve was unwavering. "I don't need to defeat you. The kingdom will decide. I ask for peace, for the sake of Iolcus, for the sake of our people." For a long moment, Pelias said nothing. The weight of the prophecy, the weight of his fear, seemed to settle over him like a shadow. And then, with a quiet sigh, he stepped aside. "You have won, Jason. The throne is yours." Jason stood still for a moment, as if processing the gravity of what had just transpired. But then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward, the fleece still clutched in his hands. The journey was over, but the true work had just begun. With the throne of Iolcus finally in Jason's hands, the golden fleece now resting securely in the palace, there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. The Argonauts had returned as heroes, and Jason had achieved what many thought was impossible. Yet, even in this moment of victory, there was no peace. The kingdom was still fractured, and Jason's path to true leadership would not be without its challenges. As the days passed and Jason settled into his new role as king, he could feel the weight of his actions pressing on him. The fleece was the key to his power, but it was not the only thing that bound him to Iolcus. Jason had made enemies along the way, and the ones he had left behind in Colchis were now determined to reclaim what they believed was theirs. One such enemy was Medea's brother, Absyrtus. The son of King Aetes, Absyrtus had always been a loyal servant to his father, and his hatred for Jason ran deep. He had long been a thorn in Jason's side, and his presence loomed over the kingdom like a dark cloud. Medea, though she had aided Jason in his quest for the fleece, had never fully escaped the ties that bound her to her family. Now it seemed that those ties would bring tragedy once more. When word reached Jason that Absyrtus was approaching the shores of Iolcus, he knew that there would be no avoiding a confrontation. The Argonauts had already made their way through countless dangers, but this would be different. Absyrtus was not just an enemy, he was family. And family, as Jason had learned on his journey, could be the most dangerous kind of foe. Jason summoned Medea to his chambers, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his heart. He knew that the decision he was about to make would haunt him forever. Medea, though powerful and wise, was bound by a loyalty to her bloodline, a loyalty that Jason had come to fear. Medea, Jason began, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. Absyrtus is coming. We cannot allow him to threaten the peace we've fought for. I need to know what we should do. Medea's eyes darkened, her face a mask of conflict. She knew that her brother's arrival meant only one thing: war. I cannot ask you to forgive him, Jason, she said softly. He is my blood, but he is also a threat to everything we have built. I have no choice but to stop him. Jason's heart clenched as he realized the depths of Medea's pain. She was torn between her duty to her family and her loyalty to him, and in this moment he could see the emotional toll that her choices had taken on her. She had sacrificed so much for him already, and now she would be asked to make one more sacrifice, one that could cost her everything. I don't want this for you, Medea, Jason said quietly, his voice filled with regret. But if your brother threatens us, we must act. The kingdom cannot survive a war. Medea's eyes softened, but there was a coldness to her gaze that Jason had never seen before. I will do what must be done, Jason. But know this: I have already given everything to you, and I will give even more if it means protecting our future. The decision was made, though it came with heavy hearts. Medea would confront her brother, but Jason knew that even in this, there was no simple solution. The death of Absyrtus would not bring peace. It would only serve as another reminder of the price of power. That night, as the moon rose high above the kingdom, Medea carried out her plan. She confronted Absyrtus, alone in the darkness of the royal gardens. The air was thick with tension as she faced her brother, who had come to claim the fleece and punish the one who had stolen it. The two siblings stood in silence, each one burdened by the choices they had made. Absyrtus was a warrior, fierce and loyal, but his fury was not enough to save him from the cold calculations of Medea's magic. She spoke not a word as she cast her spell. The darkness around them seemed to pulse with power as Medea's incantation took hold. Absyrtus, unaware of the spell, drew his sword and rushed toward her, but it was too late. Medea's magic struck him, and he fell to the ground, lifeless before her. The death of Absyrtus was a quiet, tragic event. A final severing of the ties that bound Medea to her past. She stood over her brother's body, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. For Jason, the death of Absyrtus meant that the threat to his reign had been eliminated, but it also meant that the cost of their journey had become even more apparent. Medea's sacrifice had claimed the life of her own flesh and blood, and Jason could not help but wonder how much longer they could continue this path of bloodshed and loss. Medea returned to the palace, her face unreadable. She did not speak of her actions to Jason, but the silence between them spoke volumes. She had done what was necessary to protect him, but in doing so, she had paid a price that Jason could never fully understand. The death of Absyrtus would not be the end of Jason's trials, but it would be a turning point. The kingdom of Iolcus was now firmly under his control, but the shadows of his past were beginning to catch up with him. The path of power was fraught with sacrifice, and Jason would soon learn that the price of kingship was higher than he had ever imagined. With Absyrtus's death, Jason's hold on Iolcus seemed more secure than ever. The fleece, now in the royal vault, was a symbol of his victory, and the people of Iolcus had begun to accept him as their rightful king. But for all the peace that the fleece promised, Jason could not ignore the shifting currents of his own kingdom. Power, once attained, is never easily held, and Jason was beginning to understand this truth all too well. The early days of his reign were filled with ceremony, the joy of triumph coloring every moment. But beneath the surface, Jason could sense the tension building. Peleus, though he had relinquished the throne, was not content to quietly fade into the background. The former king was a man of great pride, and though he had accepted Jason's rule, there were whispers of rebellion in the air. Peleus would not go down without a fight, and Jason knew that the former king's influence could rally those who still doubted his leadership. Medea, for all her wisdom and power had withdrawn into herself since the death of her brother. Her heart, it seemed, was torn in two. On the one hand, she had helped Jason secure the throne, but on the other, she had paid a personal price that would never be repaid. The sacrifice of her brother, though necessary, had left its mark on her soul, and Jason could feel the distance growing between them. There were moments when Medea seemed lost in thought, her eyes distant, and Jason knew that her magic, powerful as it was, could not erase the pain she carried. As the weeks passed, Jason found himself more and more isolated. The council of advisors that had once supported Peleus now turned their gaze toward him, their loyalty wavering. He was their king, yes, but how long would his reign last if he could not win the hearts and minds of his people? The Fleece had secured his position, but Jason knew that it was not enough. He needed to prove himself as a leader, not just as a man who had claimed what was his by birthright. One afternoon, as Jason walked through the royal gardens, he was approached by his most trusted advisor, Acastus. Acastus had been one of Peleus's closest confidants, but had pledged his loyalty to Jason after the fall of the former king. Jason respected him, but he also knew that Acastus, like many of the others, was a man who thrived on power. "Your Majesty," Acastus began, bowing slightly. "There are murmurs among the people. They speak of Peleus's supporters, those who have not yet accepted your rule. The loyalty of the nobles is questionable." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. The words were familiar, too familiar. He had known that there would be dissent, but hearing it spoken aloud only served to amplify his concerns. "And what do you suggest we do, Acastus?" Jason asked, his tone sharp. Acastus hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "We must act quickly. If we do not move decisively, we risk losing the loyalty of the people. Peleus still holds sway with some of the kingdom's most influential families. If we do not neutralize his supporters, they could rally together and stage a revolt." Jason's mind raced. The idea of rebellion was one he had hoped to avoid, but the reality of ruling was much more complicated than he had imagined. Peleus was not gone. He had simply been pushed to the shadows, and now Jason was forced to confront the consequences of taking the throne from a man who had ruled for so long. "I've already taken the throne by right," Jason said, his voice heavy. "I have the Fleece. I have the people's support. What more can I do?" Acastus's eyes narrowed and he stepped closer. "You have the Fleece, but power is not something that can be given. It must be taken. You must show them that your rule is unshakable. We cannot allow Peleus to regain his influence. Not now, not ever." Jason stood still for a moment, weighing Acastus's words. He knew that power came at a price. He had learned this on his journey to Colchis and on the sea with the Argonauts. The Fleece had been a symbol of victory, but it could not protect him from the schemes of men. If he wanted to rule Iolcus, truly rule it, he would have to make difficult choices, choices that might come at a steep personal cost. "I will not be like Peleus," Jason said, his voice firm. "I will not rule with fear." Acastus bowed his head slightly. "Then, Your Majesty, you must act swiftly. You must solidify your position before someone else does." Jason's gaze darkened as the weight of the task before him settled into his bones. He had come so far, but now the real battle for his kingdom was about to begin. It would not be a battle fought with swords, but with alliances, with loyalty, and with the subtle manipulation of those who sought to take what was his. "Gather the council," Jason commanded. "It is time to make our move." As Acastus hurried off to prepare the meeting, Jason stood alone in the garden. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment he allowed himself a breath of solitude. But in his heart, he knew that the peaceful reign he had imagined was slipping away. He had won the throne, but the true struggle for power was only just beginning. Jason had not expected his rise to the throne to be without resistance, but he had hoped for more time to solidify his position before the true struggle began. The whispers of rebellion, the murmurs of dissent among the noble families had become louder with each passing day. The tension in Iolcus had reached a boiling point. King Peleus, though technically removed from power, still commanded influence, and his supporters had begun to rally. Jason had spent his first weeks as king in relative peace, but that peace was fragile. Now it was time to confront the threat head on. He knew that he could not afford to wait any longer. Peleus and his followers would not rest until they had reclaimed the throne for themselves. The meeting with the council was tense. Jason had called together the kingdom's most trusted advisors, and though they sat around him, none seemed fully supportive. Acastus, ever the pragmatist, was the only one who spoke with full confidence. "Your Majesty," Acastus began, his voice measured, "Peleus has the loyalty of many influential families. He is not an enemy we can defeat with force alone. We must consider how to undermine his support." Jason looked around the table, his eyes scanning the faces of his advisors. "I did not come this far only to be overthrown by fear. I have the golden fleece, and I have earned the throne by right. I will not let Peleus take it from me." The room fell silent, the weight of Jason's words settling heavily over them. His resolve was clear. He had come to reclaim his birthright, and he would not let his uncle's treachery undo that. But as Acastus had warned, defeating Peleus would not be as simple as confronting him in battle. Jason needed to break Peleus's hold on the kingdom. He needed to expose the cracks in the old king's power before it consumed everything Jason had worked for. "Peleus will not be easily swayed," Jason continued, his voice growing more determined. "I need to face him to end this once and for all." Acastus nodded, understanding the weight of Jason's decision. "We can't defeat him with armies alone. If you wish to confront Peleus directly, it must be done carefully. Jason's gaze hardened. He had faced dragons and warriors, outwitted gods, and yet this was the true test of his leadership. Confronting his uncle would be no easy feat. It was a political battle as much as a physical one. The loyalty of the people hung in the balance, and Jason knew that any misstep could lead to chaos. The following days were filled with careful strategy. Jason consulted with his most trusted advisors, casters, and others who had remained loyal to him. Together, they devised a plan to confront Peleus, but it was one that required subtlety and cunning. Jason knew he could not simply storm the palace and demand the throne. Instead, he needed to expose Peleus for what he was, a man who had held the kingdom in fear for far too long, a man who had betrayed his own family for power. Jason would need to turn the people against him, to show them that he, not Peleus, was the true ruler of Iolcus. The plan was set in motion. Jason would first confront Peleus publicly, forcing his uncle to acknowledge his claims to the throne. But Jason would also seek to undermine Peleus's support among the nobility, using the Fleece as a symbol of his rightful rule. He knew that the people of Iolcus had long suffered under Peleus's reign, and now it was time to remind them of that. When the day of confrontation arrived, Jason stood before the palace, the weight of his decisions pressing heavily on his shoulders. He had come so far, and now he would take the final step. His hands gripped the Fleece tightly, the symbol of his victory, of his claim to the throne. The people had gathered in the courtyard, their eyes fixed on Jason as he entered. The nobles stood at attention, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Peleus, standing tall and proud, looked down at Jason from his throne, his eyes cold with calculation. "Jason," Peleus said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "you return with the Fleece. But what makes you think you are worthy of the throne? You are my nephew, but you are not fit to rule." Jason stepped forward, the Fleece in his hand. The crowd fell silent as he approached the throne, his eyes fixed on Peleus. "I have come to claim what is rightfully mine," Jason said, his voice steady and clear. "I have defeated the trials, I have earned the Fleece, and I am the rightful king of Iolcus." Peleus scoffed, his gaze narrowing. "You think a simple Fleece can make you king? You have no idea what it takes to rule. You are nothing more than a boy who has been handed everything." Jason's heart surged with the weight of the moment, but he stood firm. "I have fought for everything I have, and I will fight for this kingdom, for its people, for its future." The crowd watched in silence, their eyes flicking between Jason and Peleus. The tension was palpable, and Jason could feel the weight of the kingdom's future in his hands. But as the words left his mouth, something changed. The nobles, who had once been loyal to Peleus, now looked uncertain. The people, who had long lived under the shadow of his rule, were beginning to see the truth. Jason had come not only to claim the throne, but to change the course of Iolcus' history. His words resonated, and in that moment, he knew that the true struggle for power had begun. The days that followed Jason's public confrontation with Peleus were fraught with tension. The Fleece, now a symbol of Jason's claim to the throne, had become both a blessing and a curse. Though it solidified his right to rule in the eyes of many, it also drew the attention of those who feared the change it represented. Peleus, though momentarily defeated, had not given up his ambitions. Behind closed doors, his supporters continued to plot, and Jason knew that the political battle was far from over. Jason had faced beasts and warriors, outwitted gods, and navigated treacherous seas. But the politics of ruling were a different kind of battle. It was one of patience, of negotiation, of alliances and betrayals. He had learned from the trials of his quest that power was not easily obtained, and it was even harder to maintain. The Fleece had been the key to his success, but it was also a reminder of the price he had paid. The path to true leadership was no longer about personal glory. It was about protecting his people, securing peace, and maintaining order. The palace in Iolcus, once a symbol of Peleus's tyrannical rule, now felt like a gilded cage. Jason found himself spending long hours in council meetings, trying to navigate the complex web of loyalties and rivalries that existed among the nobles. The support he had once felt from his fellow Argonauts seemed distant now, as each day brought new challenges and difficult decisions. Medea, still by his side, had become both a source of strength and a reminder of the sacrifices they had made. Her magic had helped him claim the Fleece, and her counsel had been invaluable. But even she seemed to be growing weary of the weight of the throne. Jason could feel her presence fading, just as his own was becoming increasingly consumed by the demands of leadership. One evening, as the sun set behind the palace, Jason found himself alone in the garden, deep in thought. The weight of the crown was heavier than he had imagined. Despite the victories he had achieved, despite the promise of a better future, the kingdom was still fragile. The people were wary, the nobles were divided, and Peleus's shadow still loomed large. Medea approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the gravel path. She did not speak at first, but Jason could feel her gaze on him, the understanding in her eyes. "I feel the weight of the kingdom more each day," Jason admitted, his voice filled with quiet frustration. "The people are restless, the nobles have their own agendas, and Peleus's influence is not gone. It never truly will be, will it?" Medea stood beside him, her presence a steadying force. "No, Peleus will always be a shadow over Iolcus, but you have the Fleece. You have the support of the people. You have the strength to rule. But you must remember, leadership is not just about power. It is about trust. You must earn the trust of those around you, Jason, and never forget the cost of your decisions." Jason's side, his eyes drifting toward the horizon. I never imagined it would be like this. I thought that if I could defeat Peleus, everything would fall into place. But it's not enough. It never is. Medea's hand rested gently on his shoulder. You are not the first king to face such challenges, and you will not be the last. But you must choose wisely, Jason. Each decision you make now will shape the future of this kingdom, and those decisions will follow you, just as the fleece will follow you. Jason turned to face her, his expression hardening with resolve. I will not let Iolcus fall into chaos. I have come too far. Medea nodded, a small smile crossing her lips. I know, and that is why you will succeed. But remember, power is fleeting, loyalty is earned, and peace is fragile. You will face more challenges, Jason. This is only the beginning. Jason stood silently for a moment, the weight of her words settling within him. He knew that his journey was not over, that there were still battles to fight, both within and outside the palace walls. The fleece had brought him here, but it was his decisions, his actions that would determine his legacy. As the days turned into weeks, the political landscape of Iolcus began to shift. Peleus's supporters, though weakened, were still a force to be reckoned with. They plotted in the shadows, seeking any opportunity to undermine Jason's rule. The nobles, once divided by their loyalty to Peleus, began to see Jason as a figurehead, a king who had not yet proven himself. And while the people of Iolcus were grateful for the fleece and the promise of a new era, they were not yet ready to embrace Jason fully as their ruler. The struggle for power continued, and Jason knew that the kingdom's future depended on his ability to maintain control. He had no time for complacency. The trust of the people could be lost as quickly as it was gained, and every day brought new challenges. He had fought the monsters of legend, navigated the treacherous waters of politics, and won the fleece. But now he had to fight the most difficult battle of all, the battle to secure his reign and to prove that he was worthy of the crown. In the quiet of the palace, Jason understood what he had to do. He would face the dangers of leadership head-on, not with fear, but with the strength of conviction. His path had been carved through trials, but the real test of a king was not in the battles he fought, but in the way he ruled once he claimed the throne. And Jason, for all his doubts, knew one thing. He would fight for Iolcus, for its people, for its future, and for his own legacy. The days following Jason's return to Iolcus were marked by increasing unrest. Despite the golden fleece in his possession, despite his victory over Peleus and the trials he had overcome, Jason's rule was not as secure as it appeared. Beneath the surface of his kingdom, there were those who still yearned for the old ways, still believed in the power of the man who had once ruled with fear and ambition. They could not easily accept the change that Jason represented. Jason's decision to confront Peleus directly had been bold, but it had not resolved all the issues facing the kingdom. Pelias, though officially dethroned, still had influence among the nobility, and his supporters were many. Over time, the subtle machinations of his loyalists began to stir once more, seeking to undermine Jason at every turn. Jason felt the weight of the throne more heavily with each passing day. The decisions he made were no longer just about reclaiming a birthright. They were about keeping the peace, maintaining order, and winning the loyalty of the people who, despite their outward support, still questioned his leadership. The pressure of ruling, of keeping his kingdom together, was beginning to take its toll. And, as always, the threat of betrayal loomed just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. Medea, though still loyal to him, had become more distant in recent weeks. Jason could feel it. Her subtle withdrawal, the silences that stretched between them. The pain of the sacrifices she had made for him had left its mark. And though she was still by his side, there was a coldness to her that Jason could not ignore. The death of her brother, Absyrtus, still weighed heavily on her soul, and though Jason understood the necessity of the act, it did not make the burden any lighter. One evening, as Jason sat in his chambers, lost in thought, a knock at the door broke the silence. He looked up, startled, and called for the visitor to enter. His advisor, Acastus, stepped inside, his face grim. "Your Majesty," Acastus began, bowing low, "there is troubling news." Jason stood, his heart sinking at the tone of Acastus's voice. "What is it?" "There has been a whisper of treason among the nobles. Some are gathering in secret, speaking of Pelias and his influence. They believe your reign is not as stable as you think. They believe that the throne should return to his bloodline." Jason's blood ran cold. The threat was real. Pelias's supporters had never truly gone away. They had only been waiting for the right moment to strike, and now it seemed that moment had arrived. "How many?" Jason asked, his voice steady despite the fury rising within him. Acastus hesitated before speaking. "Not many yet, but the seed of rebellion is growing. There are those who would betray you, Jason. They see the cracks in your rule, and they will seek to exploit them." Jason's thoughts raced. He had faced countless challenges, but this one was different. This was not a monster to defeat or a battle to win. This was a struggle for his very life and the life of his kingdom. "Who?" Jason asked, his tone sharp. Acastus's face remained impassive. "There are whispers that it is not just the nobles who are involved. Some of your own guards, your closest men, may be part of the conspiracy. They are seeking to turn the tide back in Pelias's favor." Jason's mind reeled at the implications. Betrayal from within his own ranks was the most dangerous kind. If the men who had sworn to protect him were turning against him, there would be no safety, no sanctuary. His throne could fall with a whisper, a single act of treachery. "We cannot allow this to fester," Jason said, his voice firm. "I will not let Peleus return to power." Acastus nodded. "We must act quickly, Your Majesty. If we do not stamp this out now, it will spread like wildfire." Jason turned away, his mind racing. He had fought so hard to claim the throne. He had endured the trials, faced the beasts, and earned the fleece. But now, the true test of his reign was beginning. He was not just battling Peleus. He was battling the very idea of his power, the very trust of his kingdom. That night, as the moon hung high in the sky, Jason made his decision. He would confront the traitors, root them out before their plans could come to fruition. He would strike quickly and decisively, showing no mercy to those who sought to betray him. There could be no tolerance for rebellion, not while the throne was still in his hands. With Acastus by his side, Jason gathered his most trusted guards and made his way to the heart of the palace where the conspirators were said to meet in secret. The halls were dark, the silence thick with tension. Every step Jason took brought him closer to the confrontation that would determine the fate of his kingdom. As they entered the chamber, Jason's heart pounded in his chest. The conspirators, a small group of nobles and guards, stood in a circle, their heads bowed in hushed conversation. At the sight of Jason, they froze, their eyes wide with fear and surprise. Jason did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the group, and his voice rang out, cold and unforgiving. "Enough," he said, his words like a thunderclap in the silence. "You will not betray me. You will not take this kingdom from me." The conspirators fell to their knees, their hands raised in surrender. Jason's gaze remained unwavering, his grip on the fleece tightening as he addressed them. "This kingdom belongs to me," Jason continued, his voice low but filled with authority. "And I will not let anyone take it from me. Not Peleus, not you." The traitors trembled before him, their faces pale. Jason could see the fear in their eyes, but there was no mercy in his heart. He had given too much to let it slip away now. "Leave this place," Jason commanded, "and never return. If you value your lives, you will stay out of my way. If you do not, you will meet the same end as Peleus." The conspirators scurried away, leaving Jason standing alone in the chamber. Acastus stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and relief. "You have made your decision, Jason," Acastus said quietly. "There is no turning back now." Jason nodded, his resolve unshaken. He had faced the rebellion head-on and come out victorious. But deep inside, he knew that this was only the beginning. The price of power had been steep, and Jason would pay it again and again if it meant securing his throne. The dust had barely settled from the confrontation with the conspirators when Jason realized the true cost of ruling Iolcus. Though the traitors had been driven out, their actions had left a deep wound in the kingdom. Jason had won the throne by right, but in the process He had also learned that power came with suspicion, doubt, and fear. The loyalty of the people, once assured, now seemed fragile, as if the kingdom's foundation was made of sand, ready to crumble at the slightest shift. Even in the aftermath of the betrayal, Jason could feel the eyes of the nobles and the people upon him. He had dealt with the immediate threat, but he had no illusions. This was not a battle won by sword alone. The true battle was in the hearts and minds of his subjects, and the victory of silencing the rebellion had come at a price he hadn't anticipated. Jason spent the days following the betrayal in quiet contemplation. He did not want to rule by fear, yet that fear seemed to be taking root in his own heart. If the betrayal could come from his most trusted advisors and those within his inner circle, what was left of the trust in his reign? Medea, ever by his side, had been silent for the most part. She had seen the strain in Jason, and though her power had been instrumental in their victory, even she could not deny that the path forward was unclear. The Fleece had brought him to power, but the burdens of that power weighed heavier each day. One evening, as the sun began to set behind the palace walls, Jason stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The quiet murmur of the people reached him, their lives carrying on despite the turbulence of the past months. The city seemed peaceful, almost serene, but Jason knew better. Beneath the surface, there was unrest, an unease that could erupt at any moment. Medea, Jason spoke softly, without turning to look at her. I've fought so hard to get here, but now that I'm here, I can feel it slipping away. I'm losing them. Medea stepped beside him, her presence comforting, though she knew the burden he carried was his alone to bear. You've been through so much, Jason. I know the pain you're feeling, but the people, they need to see more than a king. They need to see a leader. And a leader is not just one who takes the throne, but one who can hold it. Jason turned to face her, his gaze weary. I thought that the Fleece would make everything clear, that once I had it, I'd be secure. But instead, it's made everything more complicated. I can feel the distrust growing, the whispers behind my back. Medea placed a hand on his arm, her eyes filled with understanding. You cannot force loyalty, Jason. It must be earned. You've won the Fleece, but you must win their trust now. And trust is not a simple thing. It's fragile, like glass. It takes years to build, and only a moment to shatter. Jason's gaze fell to the courtyard below, where the people moved about their daily lives, unaware of the storm brewing within their king. He had done what no one else had, yet his success felt hollow. How could he be the ruler they needed when he, himself, felt like a puppet to fate? What if I fail them, Medea? He asked quietly, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. What if I can't keep the kingdom together? What if, in the end, I'm no different from Peleus, holding on to power at all costs, sacrificing everything in the name of it? Medea's expression softened. You are not Peleus, Jason. You are a man who has been tested by the gods, by destiny, and by those who wish to see you fall. But you are still standing, and that is what matters. Her words gave him little comfort, for he knew that the path forward would be a constant struggle, one that would demand more of him than he had ever imagined. The people would not simply accept him because he had the fleece, or because he had defeated Peleus. They would need to see him as a king who could lead them through the storms ahead, not just the one who had taken the throne. Jason knew that his next move would be the most critical of all. The kingdom was fragile, and the rebellion, though silenced for now, had left a scar on the people's hearts. He could not afford to be passive any longer. He had to prove himself, not just as a ruler, but as a leader who could bring true change to Iolcus. With this resolve in mind, Jason turned back toward the palace. I will speak to the people. I will show them that I am more than a king who inherited a throne. I will be a king who earns their trust, who leads with honor. Medea nodded, her expression thoughtful. And in doing so, you may also earn something else, your own peace. Jason's heart felt heavy with the realization of what lay ahead. His journey was not over. It had only just begun. The fleece was the symbol of his victory, but the true measure of his reign would not be found in the treasure. It would be found in the choices he made and in the loyalty he could earn from the people of Iolcus. The palace of Iolcus stood tall and imposing, its ancient stone walls still echoing with the memories of past rulers. Jason, having ascended to the throne by right and by struggle, now faced his greatest challenge. The fleece, his symbol of victory, no longer felt like enough. The true test of his reign, he realized, was the trust and loyalty of the people, and that trust could not be bought with the relic of an ancient treasure alone. Jason stood at the balcony of the royal palace, his hand resting on the cool stone of the railing. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and red, a striking contrast to the storm brewing in his heart. His thoughts were heavy, burdened by the responsibility of ruling a kingdom that had long been divided. The people were unsure, and even the nobles were hesitant to fully pledge their loyalty. The rebellion had been quelled for now, but Jason knew that peace was delicate, like glass waiting to shatter. Medea had stayed by his side, a quiet but powerful presence. She knew the path he had to walk, the sacrifices he would need to make. Her magic had brought him to this point, but now it was Jason's words and actions that would determine the kingdom's fate. She had told him that trust must be earned. Now it was time for him to show the people of Iolcus who he truly was. I will speak to them, Jason said to himself, his voice steady with resolve. It's time they hear from their king. Medea, who had been quietly observing, stepped closer. Her gaze was soft, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fire that matched Jason's own. They need to see you, not just as a ruler, but as their protector, their leader. Speak from the heart, Jason. They've seen what you can do with the fleece, but they need to see what you can do with your people. Jason turned to her, his expression filled with gratitude and determination. Thank you, Medea. I couldn't have come this far without you. Medea smiled faintly. You've come far, Jason, but the journey is not over. Let them see who you are and what you stand for. With her words still ringing in his ears, Jason made his way to the palace's grand hall. The council of nobles was gathered, their faces filled with skepticism and curiosity. He had called for this meeting, and he knew that it would be the moment that either solidified his rule or shattered it. As he entered, the room fell silent, the nobles standing and bowing, though their eyes betrayed the doubt that lingered beneath their outward respect. Jason stepped to the center of the hall, his eyes sweeping over the assembled nobles. The fleece, still draped over his arm, gleamed in the light. He held it out for all to see, but he knew that the symbol of his victory was not enough to win their loyalty. His voice rang out, strong and clear. Lords and ladies of Iolcus, I stand before you, not as a conqueror, but as your king. The fleece has brought me to this throne, but it is not the fleece that will keep me here. It is the trust of the people, the faith of this kingdom, and the strength of our unity. He paused, letting his words sink in. The nobles exchanged glances, some with nods of approval, others with skepticism. Jason knew that their loyalty would not come easily. I know that I have not yet proven myself to you, he continued, and I know that my claim to the throne was not without its challenges. I did not come here by birthright alone. I came here through the trials of my journey, through the blood and sweat of my comrades, and with the guidance of the gods. His voice grew more passionate as he spoke. But I am not here to simply rule. I am here to lead, to guide this kingdom into a new era, one of peace, prosperity, and unity. I am not my uncle, Peleus. I will not rule through fear, nor will I stand idly by while this kingdom suffers. The people of Iolcus deserve better. They deserve a king who listens, a king who fights for them, and a king who will not allow power to corrupt him. Jason's eyes met the gaze of the nobles, each of them now leaning forward, hanging on his every word. He knew this was his moment, the defining speech that would either unite or divide Iolcus. The fleece is a symbol, Jason said, holding it high. But it is not what makes me king. What makes me king is my duty to the people of this land. I stand before you, not as a ruler born of privilege, but as one who has fought for his people, for his destiny. Together, we will build a future where fear is not our master, and where every citizen can stand with pride. There was a long silence as Jason's words echoed in the hall. The nobles, once divided, now found themselves in a moment of reflection. Slowly, one by one, they began to nod in approval. The tension in the room began to lift as they saw the sincerity in Jason's eyes. He was not just speaking to them as a king, but as one who truly cared for his kingdom. Jason turned to face the people who had gathered outside the palace. He knew they too were watching, waiting to see if he could live up to his words. He could feel their eyes on him as he stepped to the balcony, the same one where he had gazed out over the kingdom when he first returned. He raised his voice, projecting it to the crowd below. "People of Iolcus, I stand before you as your king. The path to this throne has been long, and I have faced many trials, but I will not forget the sacrifices that brought me here, nor will I forget those who have suffered under the rule of fear. From this day forward, we move forward together as one kingdom, united." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising to the heavens. Jason's heart swelled with pride, but he knew that this was just the beginning. Trust, as Medea had said, was fragile. It could be gained, and it could be lost in an instant. But for the first time since his return, Jason felt a glimmer of hope. His people were with him. They had heard his words, and they believed in him. Jason's speech had been a moment of triumph, but it was just the beginning of the real work that lay ahead. The cheers from the crowd and the nods of approval from the nobles had filled him with a brief sense of victory. But Jason knew that loyalty could not be won with words alone. His kingdom was still divided. The old wounds of Peleus's reign were not so easily healed, and the struggles between the factions loyal to the new king and those still holding on to the old ways were far from over. As Jason navigated the challenges of ruling, the true complexities of leadership became increasingly apparent. Though he had earned the Golden Fleece and secured his claim to the throne, the kingdom was not yet whole. The nobility, though largely supportive, still carried the distrust of the past. Many had served Peleus out of fear or ambition, and their loyalty to Jason was not guaranteed. The people, though they had cheered for him, still looked to him with suspicion. Jason's reign was fragile, and he could feel it slipping from his grasp with each passing day. Despite the outward peace, there was unrest in the streets of Iolcus. The common people, though initially hopeful for change, were still suffering under the weight of years of misrule. The harvest had been poor, and the kingdom's coffers were strained. There was talk of famine in some corners, and the promise of prosperity seemed like an empty hope to many. Jason had promised to lead with honor and fairness, but the reality of governing was much more difficult than he had imagined. The pressure to deliver on his promises was growing, and every misstep threatened to undo the fragile trust he had gained. Medea, still a powerful ally and advisor, had remained by Jason's side, but even she seemed weary. The sacrifices she had made, both in aiding Jason's quest and in the aftermath of Absyrtus's death, had left her emotionally drained. Her magic was still a valuable resource, but Jason could sense her growing distance. She was a woman of immense power, but that power came with its own toll. She had helped him secure the fleece, but now Jason could not help but wonder if he had become too dependent on her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the palace gardens, Jason sat in silence, deep in thought. His gaze was fixed on the fleece, which lay on a pedestal beside him, a symbol of his victory, but also a constant reminder of the price he had paid to claim it. The weight of his crown seemed heavier than ever. Medea approached, her footsteps light on the stone path. She had not spoken much that day, and Jason could sense the tension in the air. She stood beside him, her gaze distant. "I feel as if I am losing myself, Jason," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "The weight of everything we've done, the sacrifices we've made, it's beginning to take its toll on me." Jason turned to her, concern etching his features. "Medea, you have done more than anyone could ever ask. You have given everything to this kingdom, to me. I couldn't have done this without you." Medea shook her head, her eyes downcast. "But at what cost, Jason? My brother is dead, and I have turned against my own family to help you. I thought I could be strong, but I am beginning to feel empty inside. I have lost so much, and I fear I will lose more." Jason's heart ached for her. He had come to rely on Medea not just as a magical ally, but as someone who had shared his journey, who understood the complexities of leadership and sacrifice. She had been his strength when he had none, but now it seemed that the toll had been too great. "I never wanted this for you," Jason said softly, his voice filled with regret. "You've sacrificed more than anyone should have to. You gave me the fleece, and you gave me your loyalty, but I never meant for you to lose yourself in this. I can't ask you to carry this burden forever." Medea turned to face him, her expression a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. "It is not just the fleece, Jason. It is the kingdom, the power, and the people who depend on us. The weight of it all is too much. I thought I could handle it, but now I am not so sure." The silence between them was heavy. Jason could feel the distance growing between them, a distance he couldn't cross. He had asked too much of Medea, and she had given all she had, but now it seemed that the cost was too great. He could not lose her. She was too important to him, both as a partner and as a guide. But he knew that her sacrifice was something she could not carry alone forever. "I don't want to lose you, Medea," Jason said, his voice raw with emotion. "But I also don't want you to lose yourself in this. You've already done more than I could ever repay." Medea smiled faintly, though the sadness in her eyes remained. "We all pay a price for the things we want, Jason. I chose this path, and I will continue to walk it with you. But I need to know that you will not forget what we've sacrificed, that you will remember what it takes to lead this kingdom." Jason nodded solemnly, his heart heavy. "I will remember, Medea. I will honor your sacrifice, and I will lead this kingdom with everything I have." As the night settled over the palace, Jason stood in the garden, the weight of his choices pressing heavily on his shoulders. His kingdom was still divided, the people still uncertain, and his relationship with Medea, though stronger than ever, was beginning to show the cracks of their shared struggles. He had won the throne, but the cost of keeping it would be far greater than he had ever imagined. Jason had thought he had faced the worst of the trials that came with leadership. He had fought for the throne, battled monsters, endured betrayals, and even had to confront his own fears. But the true test of a king, he had learned, was not in the battles fought with swords and shields, but in the moments that revealed the depths of loyalty and trust. Two things he had come to realize were as fragile as glass. The kingdom of Iolcus, though once again under Jason's control, remained on the brink. The peace he had worked so hard to establish was tenuous at best. His advisors, though many had sworn allegiance to him, were not all fully loyal. His grip on power, as firm as it seemed, was threatened by those who, in the shadows, still dreamed of returning the kingdom to its old ways. And the worst part was that Jason couldn't tell who he could truly trust. Medea, despite her initial relief after Jason's victory, had withdrawn further into herself. The toll of their shared struggles weighed heavily on her. Her magic had been invaluable, but it had also drained her, and Jason could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Yet, despite her inner turmoil, she remained by his side, ever loyal, though both knew that things were changing between them. Jason's rise to power had come at a steep price, and they both bore the scars of those sacrifices. The nobles who had once served Peleus had slowly been replaced, but Jason knew that the kingdom's old guard still held sway over many key figures. Some of the former royal counselors remained in power, and they were not content with a new king, no matter how noble his intentions. The Fleece, once a symbol of his triumph, had become a reminder of the deep divisions within the kingdom. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason received a message that would forever change the course of his reign. A letter sealed with the insignia of a noble house he had long considered loyal, had been delivered to the palace. At first glance, it seemed like a message of goodwill, a report on the state of the harvest, an update on trade agreements. But when Jason opened the letter and read its contents, his heart sank. The letter detailed a plot, a betrayal that reached far deeper than he could have imagined. One of his closest advisors, a man Jason had trusted as a friend and confidant, had been secretly conspiring with the remnants of Peleus' supporters. They had plotted to undermine Jason's rule, and, with the help of a small faction of soldiers, they intended to strike when Jason least expected it. Jason's mind raced as he read the words. It was a plan that had been set in motion over weeks, maybe months. The conspiracy was far-reaching, with tentacles that spread into the palace, the army, and even the council. Jason's own sense of security had been shattered. He realized with a sickening certainty that this betrayal had been woven into the very fabric of his reign. His first instinct was to confront the traitor immediately. But as Jason looked at the letter again, a cold realization washed over him. He couldn't trust anyone, not even those closest to him. He had no idea who was truly loyal and who had already turned against him. That night, Jason gathered his most trusted allies, Acastus, who had been with him since the beginning, and Medea, who had long been the anchor of his heart. They met in the dimly lit chambers of the palace, their faces grim. "I've received a message," Jason began, his voice steady but filled with rage. "A betrayal is unfolding, and it runs deeper than we imagined. One of my closest advisors has been conspiring against me. I can't trust anyone now, not even the people I thought were loyal." Acastus, though loyal, looked troubled. "Your Majesty, you have always made difficult decisions, but this is something we cannot take lightly. If there is a conspiracy at work, we must act quickly. But we must also be careful. The wrong move could cost us everything." Medea, standing beside Jason, said nothing for a long moment. Her eyes were downcast, her hands clasped tightly before her. Then, finally, she spoke. Her voice soft, but filled with an edge of steel. "You cannot let this betrayal go unpunished, Jason. If we allow this to fester, we will lose the kingdom we've fought so hard to build. You must confront this traitor, but you must also make an example of him. Otherwise, the kingdom will see your weakness." Jason's chest tightened as he listened to Medea's words. He knew she was right. The kingdom could not afford weakness, not when the very throne he had claimed was now under threat from within. But the cost of the decision weighed heavily on him. To expose the traitor would not only ruin a man's life, but could unravel the trust he had so carefully built. Yet he could see no other choice. The betrayal had to be dealt with swiftly, decisively. The next morning, Jason summoned his council. The traitor, a high-ranking noble who had long served as an advisor, was brought before him. The air in the throne room was thick with tension as Jason stepped forward, his eyes cold and unwavering. "You stand before me today, not as a servant, but as a traitor to the kingdom," Jason said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your actions have jeopardized everything we have fought for. You have betrayed your king, your people, and your very oath of loyalty." The noble, his face pale and trembling, tried to protest, but his words were drowned out by the weight of Jason's anger. "You will answer for your crimes and for the lives you've put at risk. I will not tolerate betrayal in my kingdom." The noble was led away, his fate sealed by his own treachery. But as Jason watched him disappear from the throne room, a sickening thought settled in his mind. This man was not the only one who had betrayed him. The kingdom was full of hidden enemies, and Jason knew now that his reign would be defined by more than just his right to the throne. It would be defined by the battle for loyalty and the cost of trusting anyone. Jason stood at the edge of the palace balcony, looking out over the kingdom he had fought so hard to claim. The once thriving city of Iolcus stretched out beneath him, the hustle of the streets seeming distant, almost foreign. His reign had begun with such promise, with the gleam of the golden fleece as the symbol of his right to rule. Yet now, as the sun set behind the mountains, Jason couldn't help but feel a gnawing emptiness deep within him. The cost of leadership had been far more than he had ever anticipated. The betrayal by his trusted advisor had been a breaking point, but it was just one in a series of trials that had tested Jason's ability to rule with fairness and strength. His own heart had been torn between the loyalty he had to his people and the deep sacrifices he had made to secure his power. And then there was Medea, the woman who had given him everything, who had helped him claim the throne, but at such a cost. Their bond, once strong, was now strained as the weight of leadership and the price of their decisions had begun to pull them apart. As the years passed, Jason had faced more political unrest, more battles for control, and more moments of doubt. The people who had cheered for him in the beginning now looked at him with wary eyes. His reign was never fully secure, and Jason came to understand that leadership was not about commanding respect. It was about maintaining it, day by day, decision by decision. Medea, still by his side, had become more distant with each passing day. The magic she had used to help him secure the fleece, to protect him from his enemies, had drained her. The sacrifice of her brother, Absyrtus, still haunted her. Her power had always been an asset, but now it seemed like a burden that both she and Jason were unable to bear any longer. That evening, as the palace quieted and the final traces of daylight faded, Jason found himself alone in the garden. The weight of his decisions, of the lives lost, and the people he had failed, pressed heavily upon him. He had once believed that the fleece would change everything, that it would make him the ruler he was destined to be. But now he realized the truth. No single item, no matter how powerful, could grant him peace. The throne he had so fiercely claimed was not a prize. It was a constant challenge. Medea appeared behind him, her footsteps soft against the stone path. She had remained silent in the days following the betrayal, retreating further into herself. Jason turned to face her, but there was no warmth in his gaze, not the warmth that had once defined their relationship. "Medea," Jason said, his voice quieter than he intended. "You've done so much for me, for this kingdom, but I fear that the cost of it all is too great. We've both lost so much." Medea didn't speak immediately, her gaze focused on the ground before her. "We've lost everything," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The fleece, the kingdom, the people, they are all fleeting. What are we, Jason? What are we building when all we have left is the price we've paid?" Jason felt a pang of guilt twist in his chest. He had wanted to build something great, a kingdom that would last for generations. But what had he built, really? A kingdom held together by the fragile threads of power and fear, and a love that had become strained under the weight of their shared burdens. "I never wanted this for you," Jason said, his voice raw with emotion. "You've given so much for me, for the kingdom, but I see now that I've asked too much. I've taken too much from you." Medea raised her head, her eyes meeting his. There was a coldness in her gaze now, a distance that Jason had never seen before. "We have both made sacrifices, Jason. You wanted the throne, and I wanted to be by your side. But the truth is, the throne is not enough. Power is never enough." Jason's heart ached as he realized the depth of her words. She was right. Power, even with the fleece, could never fill the emptiness inside them. They had fought for a kingdom, but in the process they had lost themselves. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared history settling over them. Jason had come so far, and yet he felt more alone than ever. The kingdom, once a symbol of his victory, now felt like a cage. The people, though they had rallied behind him, were still uncertain. His reign, built on the back of the fleece, was fragile. "I've failed you, Medea," Jason whispered. "I've failed us both." Medea's eyes softened, though the hardness that had marked their relationship in recent months remained. "We've both failed," she replied, "but we can still choose to move forward. We can still choose to rebuild what we've lost. The fleece may have given us power, but it is up to us to decide what we do with it." Jason's heart sank at the thought of rebuilding. He had already sacrificed so much. The price of leadership, of power, had cost him the very things he had once held dear. The fleece had given him a throne, but it had not given him peace. "I don't know how to rebuild," Jason admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to make things right." Medea stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You do what you've always done, Jason. You lead. You make the hard choices, and you take responsibility for the consequences." For the first time in a long while, Jason felt a flicker of resolve. He may not have all the answers, and the road ahead would be uncertain. But he knew one thing. He could no longer let the weight of his past dictate his future. He had to move forward, not just for the kingdom, but for himself and for Medea. "We can rebuild," Jason said, his voice steady once more. "But it will take time, and it will take sacrifice. We will build a kingdom where trust is earned and where the people's loyalty is not bought with fear." Medea nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Then let's begin, Jason, together." As they stood in the garden, surrounded by the quiet of the evening, Jason felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was long, and the challenges were far from over. But for the first time in a long while, he felt that they could face it together. Jason's journey from a young hero seeking glory to a king burdened by the weight of leadership has been one of triumph, sacrifice, and self-discovery. He had faced monsters and dragons, endured the trials set before him, and secured the golden fleece, an emblem of his right to rule. Yet, as the years passed and the dust of conquest settled, Jason came to understand the true cost of his power. The throne, once the object of his deepest desire, was not a prize. It was a responsibility. It demanded not just strength and courage, but wisdom and sacrifice. The challenges of ruling Iolcus were not overcome by battle alone, but by the difficult choices Jason made every day. The kingdom, once fractured by fear and distrust, slowly began to heal, but only because Jason had the courage to face the hard truths about himself and his reign. The love he shared with Medea, though tested by the struggles they both endured, remained a cornerstone of his leadership. Together, they rebuilt not just the kingdom, but the trust between them, learning that power, true power, is not just about ruling with authority, but ruling with compassion, understanding, and sacrifice. As time moved on, the story of Jason and the Argonauts became a legend, a tale told across generations of a hero who overcame the impossible to claim his birthright. But Jason's legacy would be more than just the fleece he brought back from Colchis. It would be the kingdom he built, the lessons he learned, and the strength he found in the people he ruled. For Jason, the true measure of a king was not in the treasures he possessed, but in the choices he made, and in the peace he forged from the ashes of conflict. In the end, Jason's reign was defined not by the power he wielded, but by the sacrifices he was willing to make for the good of his people and for the future of Iolcus. His journey was one of self-realization, a hero who had risen not just to claim a throne, but to prove that a true king is one who leads with both heart and mind. And so, with the golden fleece resting in Iolcus, Jason found his peace, knowing that the kingdom he had fought for, the people he had served, and the love he had shared would be the enduring legacy of his reign.